Well, if you vote for O, you're for the life. Against O, you're against everything I ever stood. Yeah. So it's like, and I think that library was there to put a lot of effort into that. He met everybody in this county that's involved. So you say we're doing good.
I also,
That's right, he's in it all seen.
I'm not sure if it's sitting water, but I think I need to sit there. My computer is environments of hard.
Really hard, that movement to and then there's dressing this, you know. Get back to me around this street.
and I saw the dream that earlier at night.
Great. I was able to organize
I
five.
thought we just got to be so bad.
An hour.
That's good.
Yeah.
Graduate school, yes.
Pardon?
I would have got to graduate school, yeah.
At Berkeley?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay. I was a city planning minor at Berkeley. They didn't have a major.
They have urban studies, right? Is it what city planning, really?
Well, they didn't have a major.
But I thought they still, oh, maybe it's not.
It all goes that way, you're swinging over there.
City planning, right? Urban studies is time for that.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit
Yeah, well, that's good. What was your major?
I had been political.
oh, thank
I
you.
was going to come over to tell you, every time I
Thank you.
She's now one of the beautiful people in Chicago.
Any person?
Well, no, I saw him. He's like a head of life.
This Audi, you know, clearing the way for you in this dark.
Existing use map.
City of talked to you, I mean,
Yes,
he hasn't submitted anything.
oh, not yet, okay. Existing house, no issue, but I can bother.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like I'm learning, no, I think I have that some.
Yeah.
come down and do it.
I know.
East side of, okay, yes, Mills. Yeah, yeah, it's a piece of, yeah.
He's, I can understand.
It's a big issue that I
You know, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you know,
you just keep it.
it's the same,
Fairly routine. That's just like whatever.
same family house.
Yeah,
Two
he said no,
families.
no
Existing.
height exception, no anything.
Enables people to do safe.
Yeah,
What happened otherwise? You know, they have to
And you must make sure that he's the mayor now. Oh, yeah, but the reason I see it, the tradition.
Sorry? Yeah, calculate the population number. Yes, this is the mean of the town.
Hello. Lauren. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That's scary.
That's after telling us the stories.
You gotta admit,
And this whole thing is just so awkward.
All that, we got micro, nice.
Website, you know, it's nationwide, it covers a really vast scope. It's interesting on a, you know, it's not necessarily a professional, but as far as, you know, how it talks about the process and gives examples and broader kind of. I can't, yeah. It's, I don't think it is that good. Like I said, it's, you know, talk about
a big house. It's a really big house. It's a nice little house. So we have that as so we have that as condition. We also add that we are not to the stage of the conservation aspect without permission. We added something else to it. Yes. So the staff report. It's different from last time. Might as well. Something that starts
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Planning Commission for Tuesday, December 9th. If you'll give me a moment, I can find my agenda. And we can start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Rosenblatt?
I am here.
Commissioner Roman?
Here.
Commissioner DeMann?
Here.
Vice Chair Johnson? Absent. Commissioner Conroy?
I'm here. Thank you, Bruce. First thing on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. I think staff put a updated version of the minutes in front of everyone tonight. Does anyone have a chance to look? And
Since I was not at the last meeting, I'll recuse myself from participating.
I move we approve the minutes as written.
Second. A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
With Commissioner Rosenblatt abstaining. Moving on to the planning manager's report.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to give you an update, we had a director's hearing for a proposal at 170 Correas earlier today, this afternoon, and that matter was continued for another week to for further study on the buffer areas. So there was no action taken, and that hearing was postponed for another week or continued for another week. That's a week from today. Then, just to give you an update on the City Council meeting for December 16th, we've got 4 items that may be of interest for the Planning Commission. We have the local coastal plan map amendment to create sensitive environmental habitat in the area adjacent to the Kehoe Ditch, and that is also owned by the Sewer Authority Midside property. We also have the council consideration of the housing element, the adoption, final adoption. We have the annual report on the Carnoustie subdivision that was approved a long time ago with a number of conditions that require the annual reporting of the compliance with the conditions. It's nearly built out. And then lastly, we have the Measure D annual water allocations for 2015 that are going before the City Council. And then your December 23rd Planning Commission meeting will be canceled. And then on January 6th, we have another Community Development Director hearing that includes street improvements, the coastal development permit for various street improvements this year that the city is sponsoring. And then in addition at 712 Monte Vista to a residential structure. And then on your meeting on January 13th, we have a subdivision, a parcel map that's proposed at 324 Main Street, and then in addition to the gymnasium at Kuna Middle School. So that would be on January 13th. And then as a follow-up to this meeting on January 20th at the City Council, we have another general plan workshop. So that will be on a general plan study session on January 20th at 7 o'clock in the same room. And then on January 27th, your January 27th Planning Commission meeting, we have 2 other items. We have a subdivision, Artist Live Work Studio project that's proposed at 501 Church Street, and then the city project for the skate park, which is right next door to here on Kelly Avenue in between this building and the Emergency Operations Center. And lastly, for your meeting on February 10th, we've got another in a series of your study sessions on the residential design guidelines. So we're trying to get a progress draft of those out to you this week or next week, and shooting to have that public hearing open up on February 10th. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Bruce. Questions to staff on the upcoming agenda? No? Okay, thank you, Bruce. Moving on to the public comment period of the evening. We only have one item on the agenda, and that is our study session for the general plan update. If you came here to speak on another item, this is your time to do it. But not seeing anybody hop to it, I will close the public comment period, and we will move on to the public hearing items. As I mentioned, the only item tonight is our study session on the general plan. The Planning Commission will not be taking any action tonight. This is an open session to listen to the public, for staff this is our first chance as a body to provide input on the general plan. So this is a good time to have an open discussion. There's no need to fear that if you don't get something said tonight, or if you don't have something in tonight, that this is your last opportunity, because this is really, for many of us, our first opportunity. So with that, I'll hand it over to staff. Bruce.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think the Community Development Director, Dante Hall, would like to say a few words before we begin the presentation.
Thank you, and good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Thank you for having us tonight. We're at a critical juncture in this process, and we're starting to talk about a lot of the issues that people feel very passionate about, and that's a good thing. And I believe that the best comprehensive plans really come from an engaged citizenry. Again, as the chair stated, no decisions are going to be made tonight. This is really an opportunity to present information to the Planning Commission, receive comments, and also an opportunity for the public process. I was trying to think about this process and what this is like, and I thought about in undergrad, I elected to take a creative writing class. And the valuable things that I took from that are that good storytelling includes the why, it includes the what, and then it includes the how. And that's really kind of the same three-step process that we're going through with this process, with this general plan update process. And the why is, I get this a lot from people in the community. Why do we need to do anything? Why can't we just keep all of the land uses the same? People like it. People like the small town feel. People like the coastal resources. Why? Why is there a need to do anything? And if I was writing a story, I was centered on the main character, but I think characterizing this process as determining what land uses go where and only determining where boulevards or streets connect in the city is a little bit of an oversimplification of the process. The general plan and LCP are the policy documents that are going to lead us forward. So why are we doing this? The big why. Basically, the plan that we have now that was approved and certified in 1993 is outdated. The analysis in it is outdated. Some of the analysis that was approved with the 1993 plan depended on analysis that was done in 1980. So we're carrying forward analysis that was done in 1980, 34 years later, 34 years later. So we need to figure out if the plans and policies still align with the community's vision of what our city should be. New analysis needs to be done. There's an imbalance to things like housing and jobs. Where people work has a significant impact on transportation systems. It has a significant impact on the environment. Do we need to look at these things? We need more accurate maps, and we brought some of the maps here tonight, and the black and white maps are the maps that were approved in 1993. Those are the environmental habitat maps. And essentially, what staff is having to do is determine the thickness of lines and kind of where things are. We need to have a more accurate system, more accurate maps with updated information. We need to look at our circulation in more of a comprehensive way. We need to look at our bus transportation. We need to look at all the modes of mobility for our city. Cities don't get the opportunity to plan comprehensively very often. And this is one of those opportunities that we need to identify and take a look at what other plans are going on in our region that we need to be aware of, and that when we have mutual goals that we can incorporate into our process. We don't have a conservation and open space element, one of the required elements. So we don't really have a policy or standard for preserving and conserving open space. We need a new standard and policy for the acquisition of parks and identifying parks. We don't have that now. So this process is kind of the what, based on the existing conditions and things that we'll go into a little bit more later. We've developed some concepts, some land use concepts that are really only for discussion at this point. Again, we're not making any decisions. We want to discuss with the community of what things should we study further to incorporate into a final plan. How are we going to deal with issues like sea level rise threat? How are we going to deal with issues like the erosion of the coastline? Should we be planning for that stuff? Should we be planning for incorporating any of the needs or plans that our school districts have in the future, that our county has in the future? Do we need to develop some policies around that? What are the infrastructure needs for the next 25 years? How are we going to pay for that? So the how, which is the last part of that kind of storytelling. So the why, the what, and the how. And this is it. This is the how. The how is the plan, it's the policy, it's the implementation strategy, it's the financing mechanism. And this is where this community will identify how they're going to deal with traffic issues going forward. It's how we're going to address the housing issues of our seniors, of our farm laborers, and other people that want to live here in our community. It addresses, or it will address, how we're going to protect our natural resources for our next generation. And so tonight, again, no decision will be made. We wanted to just come to you, present the information, some of the background data, and then answer any questions that you might have about the process, about the analysis, or anything else. So at this point, I think I'll turn it over to Bruce, and he can take you through some of the background information.
Thank you, Dante and Commissioners. Just to give you a quick rundown on some of the background, as you may recall, we did quite a bit of advanced preparation for this. Coincidentally, work began actually about a year ago, last Night of Lights, when we did the first face-to-face interviews with folks, and we summarized all of that in the community survey report. So that was, I believe, the first opportunity that we had to go out in the community and engage people to try to get a sense of what everybody's expectations are, what they liked, and what they wanted to see happen here. So since that time, we've done a number of surveys, direct mailers, and had a number of presentations and events where we've kind of spread the word and went out to find out what people felt about the general plan process and to hear their ideas for updates and how to get engaged and where to find more information. So we've done a lot of that information, or a lot of that background, to try to inform what the what the guiding principles essentially would be. But probably one of the most important things or results that we had was the preparation of the existing conditions report. And as Dante pointed out, our existing conditions maps are back there. That's what's currently approved and what we're working with, the big black and white ones. So the information that we have, particularly the environmental and the hazardous vulnerability maps, are far more current and accurate as a result of the existing conditions analysis that's before you. And then lastly, as you know, we formed the General Plan Advisory Committee, and that's been the committee that's been studying some of these concepts for discussion. They've had 5 meetings where they've been kind of revising and reviewing some of these ideas and brainstorming about what it was that they prefer to see, and providing feedback for some of the ideas that have been generated in graphic format that are up on the walls. At the most recent General Plan Advisory Committee, a summary of the and that has actually been integrated into the concepts that are displayed on the wall now and that went out in your packet. There's a summary of recommendations, like 5 or 6 of them, that is, in each time we've gone through this process with the General Plan Advisory Committee, we've been through a number of design iterations, revised and fine-tuned those concepts, and that's been an ongoing process at each of the 5 General Plan Advisory Committee meetings. At the most recent committee meeting, the consensus of the General Plan Advisory Committee was to preserve more open space and at least one theme, to create more active parkland. All these are shown on these concepts before you. And a central park showing a different bicycle and pedestrian trail. And at least one of these themes do not show visitor services in a hotel at the west end of Kelly, so that's been eliminated. And then maintain the existing PUD, which is Plan Unit Development Designation, for the Wave Crest area on one of those concepts. So that was a summary of the recommendations from the last General Plan Advisory Committee. One of the other things I meant to say at the beginning of this, in your packet we have quite a bit of correspondence that we've received. It's pretty current up until like 4 o'clock today. We've received numerous letters. We made copies of those for your record. They're also posted to the website. You have copies of them. And then we've also prepared brochures on frequently asked questions that's available at the counter. The same kinds of questions keep coming up over and over. We thought it would be helpful to provide that information in a question and answer format. So we've got frequently asked questions at the counter that's available that we'd also have on our city website. From here, I guess it'd probably be best to give it over to Rajiv and Peter for the presentation. And if you have any questions of me, I'd be happy to answer them.
I just want to see if we have any questions before we move on.
Yeah, just to help us, Bruce, give us a quick idea on timeline. What can we expect going forward? When will there be, quote, a final proposal? And what is the process to get that approved?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, as we discussed a little bit, the next meeting is going to be the City Council study session, and that's in January. And then beyond that, we envision community workshops, another community workshop where we can weigh in on yet another iteration of these concepts. But the entire time frame for developing this, we expect to easily extend for the next year. Easily the next year to 18 months. So we're in the initial stages of takeoff, if you will, in collecting the information and informing the decisions.
Are there any other questions for staff before we move on to the presentation? I just have a quick question about process before we get into the discussion of the concepts. And I want to know, and it may be helpful for other people to know, if there is a typical path for a general plan update to follow. And the reason I ask is because I've seen in a number of pieces of correspondence and in the general plan advisory committee meetings, is I've heard mentioned that we should have all of these things mapped out, typically environmental constraints, but we should have all of these things mapped out before we then approach the land uses there. It seems to me, it kind of seems to me that may have been the approach that was taken in 2004, 2005, where it was more of a policy first and before the maps were even developed. I'm sure there's somebody here that's going to take issue with my characterization of that, so forgive me for that. But I'm curious, is there a typical path? Do we start with the land uses and then refine from there, or do we start with even more finite constraints and work up to the land uses from there?
You know, Rajiv, I'd let you or Peter respond to that. These are more familiar with general plans. And
good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Commission.
There isn't a typical path per se, but what you described is something that is typically done, which is to map the environmental constraints, for example, and that's something we actually have done. If we did not present this at the, I know there were a lot of people at the last GPAC meeting that we had, where people got a first chance to hear, they came to a first meeting of the general plan, but in previous GPAC meetings, you've actually presented some of the work that we've done as part of the existing conditions analysis. And in here, if you were to open this document, there are about 40 maps, mapping biological resources, faults, geology, landslides, and so on. These are not policy maps. All we have done is we have mapped habitats where they are. We have said here the sensitive species, but we haven't taken it the next step to say that should this be protected or should that not be protected. We've simply said that this is on the National Register or this is on the State Register, but we haven't gone through and done the planning or the policy work with that. But as a basic package of good, mapping, we've gone and culled the data sources. Our biologists have gone out in the field and they've looked at as where the different habitats are. So we've done all of this work. So I believe we have a very, very good foundation. There isn't any existing data that we're lacking that we need information on before we can move forward. The only one caveat to that is that we do have a grant from the Ocean Protection Council and the state to be mapping the sea level rise more precisely and mapping the areas that will be inundated. That is a grant-funded project. We've been waiting to sign the grant with the state so we can move forward with that work, and that's about to happen. So we've done some mapping about the flooding based on data sets that are already out there. We will refine that as we do the technical work over the next few months, and then we will build that into the final land use proposals as we roll along. So we have done that, and I think people have a right to ask us if we've done that. And I do encourage people to go to the city's website. This entire document is posted out there, and it has, 30 to 40 maps of different resources, land uses, and so on in it.
There's a tremendous amount of information in there. Thank you for the context. That's all I have. Oh, Phil?
Yeah, as a follow-up to what you just mentioned, I have gone through this little booklet, and I thought it would be useful if we had an overlay of alternatives that we're now just going to be discussing. Is that a possibility?
Overlaying it with, for example, environmental constraints? Or
yes, so that we can see the environmental constraints that exist with regard to how they fit with regard to these choices.
Great idea. I think we haven't published any sort of a report on these alternatives yet, and I think we will definitely incorporate that in the report itself and make that evident in the public workshops that Dante said and Bruce said we'll have.
Thank you, Phil.
Please. Thank you. In my presentation, I'll just amplify a little bit on why we are updating the general plan, and then spend the bulk of the time on topic number 2 here, which is the presentation in here. I'm looking in this direction because I've been told to speak into the microphones. I'm not going to try to do that. I'll look in this direction. So that's the time. We'll talk about the purpose of the concepts, and we're now calling these concepts for public discussion, so we don't confuse people that these are alternatives and then we have to pick one of them. That's not the intention. These are concepts for public discussion and brainstorming, and that's what we're calling them. Talk about the framework behind those, and then discuss the concepts themselves, and then contrast and compare them to each other and to the city's existing general plan. And then I'll leave it to the chair and when exactly he wants to get the public input or not on these. In terms of the overall project status, and I know one of the commissioners asked that question, we embarked on this process just about a year ago, and the very first thing we did is we spoke to people, we had community conversations, we had a citywide survey, we did a whole bunch of work, and we did technical work on this document, some other technical reports we did as well. Now we are moving with all this information compiled, the public input, the technical work, into what we are calling choices, ideas, concepts for the future. What does it all collectively mean for us for the future? Based on that, based on public input in the workshops, based on decision maker direction, we will develop a preferred plan, sort of a single combined map that may borrow the best elements from these, and then start building on actual detailed policy proposals on which we haven't done any work yet. And that's going to take effort. We'll have to come back to you, to the GPAC, have more public workshops that'll lead into the draft general plan, the draft local coastal program, and also a zoning ordinance update for consistency with the changes that we are making in this general plan. Those will all be subject to an environmental impact report that will be prepared. That report will again be circulated for public review and commentary. We'll prepare a final environmental impact report responding to comments. It'll go to hearings, it'll go to you for recommendation, and then to the city council for actual adoption. And at all stages, there'll be opportunity for public input through workshops, through hearings, and so on. So we are quite a ways away from that stage yet. I just want to amplify a little bit, of what Dana talked about. Why do we need to update the general plan? 25 years, and I will be respond with that. It does not provide for enough housing diversity, walkability, downtown revitalization, more local stores, services, startup office space, all of the good things that people have told us that they would like to see happen in Half Moon Bay. It will not lead to a balanced community, and I'm going to present to you data that shows exactly the jobs, the housing, the ratio of the jobs-housing balance that will emerge from the current general plan, and how if we continue down that path, which is based on analysis from 1980, it will lead to a greatly more imbalanced community. I will present to you that information. It will also lead to lesser open space than we can potentially have. And I think I will describe that to you, how through the concepts that we have, we can actually gain much more open space, both open space for conservation as well as open space for active recreation. And I'll present to you that information as well. And lastly, our land use and transportation processes are not integrated. I know we went through a circulation element update, but that is not joined in with the land use element update. So it was sort of it was a good transportation attempt, but in order to do everything, synchronize everything, we need to look at them together in one fashion, and this is our opportunity to do that. And lastly, if we look at the guiding principles, which was the collective synthesis of the public input that emerged, people have a lot of aspirations about the city's future, about maintaining the city's character as it is, but also changes in some respects. And the current general plan does not lead us in that direction. If we compare that to the community sentiment and aspirations we have, and we'll try to talk about how we are trying to do a little better with the concepts that we have. So there are certain questions that came up at the last GPAC meeting. I don't mean to keep going back to the GPAC meeting, but we had a lot of community input at that meeting, and some questions came up at that meeting and have come up since, and we've responded to that in these frequently asked questions handout. It is out there as you come in if you want to pick a copy of it. One of the questions that has popped up, and people have called, emailed Dante and Bruce about it as well. Will updating this general plan result in more population? And the answer is emphatically no. In effect, the opposite is true. Each one of the concepts would result in less growth in housing and less growth in population than what the current general plan permits. And I will describe to you the exact numbers and go along with that. Also, need to point out that most population growth in San Mateo County and the Bay Area in general over the next 20 years will result from a natural population increase. In demographics, a natural increase simply means the difference between deaths and births. People are just living longer, and people continue to being born as well. So, we have this so-called natural increase in population, and the bulk of the growth need for more housing comes from this natural increase. So you age in, you want to age in place, you want to remain in the community. Maybe you don't need the bigger single-family detached house you have. You want to scale down and move down. There needs to be opportunity for people to go there and be able to do that for us to house farm workers that we've talked about, the younger families that we have in the city, accommodate the diversity of household types and sizes we have. People we had, a meeting with the Spanish-speaking group. They're very desirous of larger homes that are both rental and for sale, for example, that are townhouse style. They don't exist in the city currently. This is an opportunity for us to provide that. Another question that has come up, will the general plan result in less open space? And the answer again is no, the opposite is true. Each one of the concepts that we have, the three of them, designates far more open space than does the current general plan. And I will describe that to you as well and contrast the numbers that we have. But what the concepts seek to do is to provide clear and long-term direction and guidance for where exactly open space and agricultural land will be preserved. And the concepts also strengthen protection of the coastal open space. What can we do to reduce traffic on highways 1 and 92? We did present at the last GPAC meeting, furthering the ideas that are there in the current circulation element about the Foothills Boulevard and the bypass, and I know there was some pushback at the last meeting out there. We've recognized that. We are trying to be sensitive to that. One of the things that was a follow-up thing that Bruce mentioned was to look at the Railroad Avenue connection as a more of a pedestrian bikeway connection. We are responding to that. We are doing that in this process. The circulation element currently includes short-term strategies for Highway 1. These include putting stoplights, signal lights, intersections at some places, and we actually have brand new numbers that is part of the Mid-Coast Countywide, the County Transportation Management Plan that do show improvement in mobility if we were to do that, when that would happen, adding center turn lanes and so on. So these are all ideas that are in the circulation element currently and are being worked upon. The concepts show further improvement for bikeway, pedestrian facilities along highway corridors and in connecting neighborhoods. And the general plan itself can look at longer term strategies. Even if you don't have a Foothills Boulevard connection, we could still look at enhancement to Highway 1 potentially as maybe 4 lanes and then see what it does to mobility as opposed to just adding more turn lanes and so on. And those are ideas we will test in the process and come back to you before we make a decision. Now, the technical analysis that we had before we did this work, there were 2 bigger reports that were produced. One was an economic and market analysis where we looked at forecasted demand for various uses and activities in the city. And we also did, we've already discussed this, the existing conditions, opportunities, and trends reports. Among the kind of mapping that has been done, that is new mapping, is the flood zones, the tsunami inundation areas, the geologic hazards, the habitats and the special status species, landslides in other areas. All of this information informs these concepts for discussions. We have built it into it, and as Commissioner Rosenblatt requested, we will overlay that at the next meeting or the public meetings we have so people can actually see how we've integrated that information. All of this mapping, all of this new mapping is great, it's wonderful, it's digital, it's it builds up the latest databases. It will be extremely useful for us for general plan policies, for environmental policies that we have, for the environmental impact report we will do, and as we carry through with detailed implementation of the general plan. And yes, a question was asked in some of the correspondences, can we have a conservation element in the general plan? Yes, it's a state requirement, and our scope of work does include open space and conservation elements, and those are already built into our scope of work. We don't have to do anything special to do that. Just to contrast the information, we have put side by side some of the mapping that currently exists in the current general plan versus what we've mapped. This is a map showing flooding hazards. I cannot even tell where the flood hazards are on this. It's a little hard. But as you can see that we have mapped various flooding zones, as per the information by FEMA and others. And those are mapped in here. Similarly for landslide hazards, what those are. Those have been mapped, various degrees of landslide hazards, for example, different kinds of biological habitats. We not only ran all the databases like the California National Diversity Database, but we actually have biologists on our team. They went out and they did field work. Now, this is not specific to each individual parcel. It's not the level of detail we do in a general plan. But in terms of looking at habitat areas where the species are, those have all been mapped. And these are great pointers for us if in future we have a development somewhere the general plan policy can say, do a survey for this protocol for a certain species in this area to make sure that we have adequate protection. That's not something that currently exists in the general plan. So we believe we'll be advancing environmental protection in the city to go along with that. Dante mentioned and Bruce mentioned that we had extensive community outreach. And I'm not going to go through all of the outreach work that we have done, but I do want to point out that since the last informational meeting that we had with you several months ago, we did do additional outreach in those last 3 months or so. There have been several community presentations. Bruce and Dante have gone to several groups, have presented, and in fact, they've gone to practically any group that has asked them to come and meet with them. And these include organized groups as well as neighborhood groups. We've had informational kiosks at city events. We had a specific Spanish language meeting that was conducted in Spanish. And we've been just reaching out to groups as and when we can. That has all been done. Quickly, just a recap on what the community's aspirations are, what the guiding principles are that we are seeking to further through this planning process. And these guiding principles are, again, they were published, they were vetted by the GPAC, by the Planning Commission and the City Council. They're available on the city's website. There are hard copies of that available at City Hall if you were to stop by and pick those up. These speak to the community valuing Half Moon Bay's small town character, looking for a compact urban farm in the future, preserving our agricultural heritage, providing public gathering spaces. People want a balanced community, a balance between jobs and housing with sites for a commercial activity, office development, incorporating a tourism strategy, accommodating a variety of retail uses so people don't have to go over the hill for everyday shopping necessities, facilitating a diversity of housing types for a diversity of population that we have and a growing diverse population we have in Half Moon Bay, supporting a wider mix of land uses in downtown. People really value, and that's, you know, when you ask people what you like most about Half Moon Bay, people like the coastal setting. That's why people are here. That's what they appreciate. And people want to see the open space, the natural resources conserved. This means conserving and enhancing the beaches, the bluffs, the views to the ocean we have, the vegetation, protecting wildlife and biodiversity, enhancing public recreation opportunities, and including adaptation strategies for erosion and sea level rise, which we are actually working to map. We have a specific consultant, Noble Engineering, they specialize in this work, and they're about to embark on mapping this specifically for us. The community also desires circulation and connectivity strategies, which means improving the pedestrian and bicycle network, enhancing connections between downtown and the coast, providing alternative north-south connections, alternatives to Highway 1, which is the only sort of spine that runs through the entire city, including strategies to address congestion, create connections between neighborhoods, and creating linkages to schools which have congestion around them during certain hours, as well as parks. So what's the purpose behind the concepts? The concepts are simply ideas, strategy for discussion. They're not meant to be acted upon by you, as the chair clarified at the outset of the meeting. They build on understanding of technical assessment and community outreach. The feedback we get from everyone, the direction we get from decision makers will result in a preferred plan, which will form the basis for us to write more detailed general plan policies from. Now just let me after all that, just take a few minutes to walk through the current general plan. This is the map of the current general plan. It's also on the poster board out there that the gentleman is looking at right now. This map shows here, this is the extent of our planning area. Over here, this is almost all of this land is within the city, with the exception of 2 pockets of land, one over here, that are not within the city's sphere of influence, but we've included these to ensure along Highway 92, for example, that we can have good planning for just mobility, for transportation purposes, good coordinated planning with the county. It's not the city's intention to actually be developing any land uses in that corridor. It's just from a coordination perspective. Now, in brighter color here, there is some land that's grayed out. That's land we don't expect to change in the coming 25 years. The land that is vacant or is in agricultural use is shown in brighter colors over here. And these are the land use categories that it's designated for the future. What I want to point out is that you may go around the city and say we have all this open space in the city. Well, it's actually, most of it, almost all of it is vacant land that belongs to a private property owner that has a designation for a future use, and in almost most instances, that future use is an urban use. It's not a future agricultural use. The city has one agricultural designation. It's called heritage, sorry, what's it called? It's the
Horticulture.
horticulture and
Horticultural business, I think.
horticultural business. And there are three sites. There are the greenhouses here up in the north, there is this land here, and there is this pocket here along Highway 92. Those are the three sites of all of the agricultural land we have that the current general plan anticipates remaining in agricultural use in the future. There is a category called planned unit development. That is this color here. And there are many parcels here that have a planned unit development designation on those that are currently vacant, that may have a current agricultural use on them. This designation aims to ensure that there is comprehensive planning of these undeveloped subdivisions. The maximum density or the amount of development for these is spelled out in the general plan. It's actually pretty specifically spelled out, except in a few instances where they talk about the process of determining the actual amount that should be developed. Some of these PUDs have been developed or partially developed, but the bulk of them remain to be developed. But it needs to be again emphasized, the general plan envisions urban development on these sites eventually through a process that's laid out, and that's actually explained in a fair level of detail in this handout that is prepared over here. Also, I want to point out that there is a designation called, there are two designations, urban reserve and open space reserve. Urban reserve is this color across over here. It's this color, that color over there, right?
Light yellow.
The lighter yellow. This is the urban reserve color over here. Quite a few properties have that color. And then we have a designation called open space reserve, which is this greenish turquoise color, over here. What are these two? Urban reserve is agricultural land within the perimeter of urban development. This land across over here. This is all within the perimeter of urban development. This is intended for urban uses when development has taken place on the non-urban reserve land. So in the mid to longer term, development is anticipated when those other non-urban reserve sites fill out. The open space reserve is undeveloped land that's outside the perimeter of the existing limits. Those are these sites across over here. These are further away sites outside of the urban boundary, so to say. Here, development is deferred until after other areas are developed and are limited to low density or recreational use only. So that's the distinction between those two. Now we've talked about what does the existing general plan really mean. I just want to point out the context. Here are the years, 1990, which is when this general plan was prepared. It was adopted in 1993, but that's around that time. 2014 is where we are right now today, this year. And this is built out. And if you assume that the current one thing to point out is that the current general plan envisioned building out to the year 2000. But even if assuming that build out, that it didn't happen in 2000, but even if assuming it happened at some point in the future, population was 8,886 in 1990. It has grown by about 3,000 since the time period, about 25 years since 1992 to 2014 now. And in the next 25 years, if you envision another 25 years, it's supposed to jump to double the population, which is a huge increase. That's what's in the current general plan, is a doubling of the population of where we are today in 2014. Jobs will increase as well to 7,000, we had 2,700 jobs in 1990, we are 5,330 today. Increase a little bit more, but a little more modestly at half this rate of the population increase. With the result, when we talk about a jobs housing balance, technically we talked about a jobs to employed residents balance. What does that mean? That means that each household has a certain number of people who work, who are called employed residents. When you try to match a perfectly balanced community will have an equal number of jobs and unemployed residents, which doesn't mean that everybody who lives in the city will work in the city. It's just that there is a greater balance, there is more opportunity for people to find work within the city, and you're not on a net basis importing workers either. We've done better in terms of an overall balance since 1990. We were at 0.53 then, we had a lot more population, we are better now at a 0.87, but if the existing general plan were to build out the way it is, we would go back to a 0.64. In effect, have a 1/3 of a jobs deficit compared to the population that we are adding. What does the general plan say about agriculture, open space, and parks? The three things that are on top of people's minds. On the ground today, based on the mapping we have 1,158 acres of land within that planning area that's in agricultural use. At the build out of the general plan, only 150 of those acres is supposed to remain in agricultural use. That's the horticultural business designation that we had. Everything else is supposed to turn over to some other use. In terms of open space and regional parks, we are going to be where we are at 644 acres. We're not adding or decreasing from that. In terms of local active parks, and if the existing general plan were to keep going, we would have just over 100 acres of that parkland. We talked about that. This is the existing land that's currently in agricultural use in the city. This is all this land that's in greenish turquoise color. Here are the three sites where the general plan says that they will remain in agricultural use in the future. This is the data I was talking about to you. Open space. Here is all the land that is, that's designated for open space in the general plan. It's this. We have other land that's been acquired, for example, by trusts. That's this green color over here or elsewhere that is not currently designated for open space uses. It's for other uses. So the general plan does not envision an increase in that open space land either. In terms of parkland, this is a map from the city's parks and recreation element. There are 22 acres of parkland we have currently. The existing general plan identifies 12 sites for new parks. These are all labeled here. These are all the sites for new parks. These were a total of 171 acres. 86 acres of those have actually been conserved as open space rather than active parks. They went over to the state park and some other parks, for example. So they're in open space. They haven't been lost as open space, but they're not being used actively. There are 3 other sites of about approximately 80 acres. That's over here, over here, over here. That still have possibility for development in the future. And we are reflecting that, and that was a guidance we had at the last GPAC meeting to look specifically at those sites and see how we can incorporate those in our concepts, and we are carrying those forward through our concepts. So Bruce talked about some of the direction we got from the GPAC at the last meeting, and I'm going to repeat that about preserving more open space and so on. So let me just go on to the concept. Any questions I can answer? I know it's been a lot of information, but it's just about to roll with the concepts and then compare and contrast them, and that's where we're going to end after that. Should I roll along?
Have any questions for staff before we review the concepts?
I'm going to have Peter actually walk us through the 3 concepts. Peter?
Sure. I'm Peter. I'm with Rajiv, and we're working through this process together. It's been a very interesting process to work with this community. The concepts presented here have been refined, as both Bruce and Rajiv have said, with the input that we've gotten up till now, and we look forward to your input tonight as we prepare to take these forward to the next step to the City Council and again to the community. So the point of that is to say this is still a work in progress. These are ideas for discussion, and we've tried to create 3 distinct concepts that each sort of emphasize one of the things or let's say a set of the values that the community has expressed to us up till now. So the first one, the compact core concept, the emphasis of this one is how could we grow in a really compact way, almost all within a 1-mile radius of downtown Half Moon Bay. And in so doing, maintain as much agriculture and open space outside of that radius as we can. So that's what is represented by this concept. You see all of this, as Rajiv is pointing, land to the north, which is currently in one of these reserve categories, would be described in the general plan as agriculture, very straightforwardly. Setting that as the long-term use of the land. To the south, again, you have more priority open space preservation in the Wavecrest area. And then in the center, that's where you have more opportunities for diverse kinds of housing, employment opportunities, and a revitalized downtown. Getting a little bit more into detail, into the central part of Half Moon Bay in this concept, you would have Kelly Avenue becoming a more important spine linking a revitalized downtown with new neighborhoods to the east and to the west. To the west being this anchor right there at Francis Beach at the coast. We are representing that as an opportunity for a visitor-serving use, something that would bring visitors to Half Moon Bay in close connection to downtown and nurturing those businesses. To the north of downtown, you have a large open site, which we're calling the Podesta property. That's the name of the PUD. In this concept, that would be an office site. So that would be an area where you'd be having an employment opportunity very close to downtown Half Moon Bay again.
And also downtown itself would be extended, so to say, and embrace Highway 92 with a gateway, out there. And then we would have a somewhat longish main street, which would provide presence along from Highway 92 as well. Peter?
Yes. So moving on, I think, I guess one more thing about this that I would point out. The open space, the active open space concept in this alternative is really centered on Pilarcitos Creek. So it would be emphasizing that creek corridor with new string of smaller parks. Rather than one central park, you'd have a string of new parks along that, both on the east and on the west, new park sites.
Corresponding with the places where we're adding new neighborhoods.
Exactly.
So people will have great access to the active recreation parks and be able to walk or jog along the creek itself to downtown and to other neighborhoods.
Right. There is, instead of, as we had previously shown at GPAC, a sort of a foothill boulevard, we're showing an east side trail. This is actually common to all of the concepts, and you'll see that in all of the concepts. I think it's an important potential resource, both recreationally and even to get around. I think in this concept, because you don't have neighborhoods developing to the north, it's more of a recreational feature, and you'll see in some of the other concepts the way it interacts with neighborhoods. Kelly Avenue, I mentioned, would become a spine. You would see greater streetscape improvements there to make it a nicer street. And we have in this and in the other alternatives, Highway 1 improvements that would ease congestion and travel by all modes, bike lanes, bike facilities, improved walking facilities, and so on. I think the general plan process also would consider some additional opportunities for pedestrian enhancements. Crossings of Highway 1, this is another thing we heard from the community that they wanted to see more of in these discussion concepts was, what about, people getting along and across Highway 1 without using a car. Neighborhood connections is the second of the discussion concepts. I think on the wall it's over on the right, so I misordered them up there. The main idea with neighborhood connections is how do you knit together some of the neighborhoods, particularly north of downtown on the east side of Highway 1, so that people can get around, make shorter trips without getting in their car all the time. People can be able to walk to high school, walk to downtown, and so on. How do you link those neighborhoods and make them feel more connected? So you see opportunities for those neighborhoods to be connected with new neighborhoods coming into play between them, while at the same time agricultural land and open space is preserved west of Highway 1. That was something we heard from a lot of people, that they wanted to see more open space and agriculture west of Highway 1. So in this alternative, that's really emphasized. And as well, to the south, you have the Wavecrest area would maintain its planned unit development designation, which again was something we heard from the community as something that they wanted to see as an option.
In the last GPAC meeting, you
yes, exactly. So getting into a little bit more detail with the neighborhood connections, you see some of the new neighborhoods taking shape on the currently agricultural but urban reserve designated land north of downtown Half Moon Bay. You see employment and some higher density housing opportunities close to downtown. You see this node, sorry about that. You see up in the north, this kind of neighborhood node where you'd have some local shopping and service opportunities combined with a couple of visitor serving opportunity sites. That would be close to Venice Beach. And some higher density housing right there that could be walkable to some services and neighborhood retail. Getting into the open space and parks characteristics of this concept, with those new neighborhoods would come new neighborhood parks, and crucially, in this alternative, you see one large Central Park site on the Beechwood site, which some of you know is a city-owned property. So you'd see that would now sort of become, because of the northward trajectory of growth under this concept, that really would be central to sort of halfway between the new neighborhoods and the old neighborhoods and downtown Half Moon Bay. Then to the south of that on the Podesta site, you'd still have offices, but you'd also have some more housing, a new little park to support that housing. Then to the west, following the guidance that we got at GPAC, you do have an agricultural designation for some of those sites at the west end of Kelly Avenue toward the beach, so that open space character, that agricultural activity and agricultural zoning would exist on the west side of Highway 1.
Coast Side Trail.
Again, the East Side Trail, which is following the path of what has been discussed as Foothill Boulevard, would, in this alternative, would really link some down to Highway 92, where there'd be a new park, new open space, and down to Pilarcitos Creek, where that trail would then link in with a trail along the Pilarcitos Creek corridor.
It's a trail. It's not a roadway. It's for ped bikes.
A ped bike trail, exactly. So you start to see a trail system coming into play in each of these alternatives, and I think I'll try to speak to it, but it's also easy to see that on the maps. In terms of circulation, as with the other themes, this one would include Highway 1 circulation improvements that have been discussed and approved as part of the recent circulation element update, new street connections within the neighborhoods, as well as trails and ped and bike improvements connecting those neighborhoods, and coastal trail being extended to the south with additional neighborhood connections. Finally, the third concept we have, which is the one that's in the middle on the wall, is called Showcasing the Coast. And in this concept, the main theme is connecting people in Half Moon Bay and people who want to come visit Half Moon Bay more effectively with the coastline. So linking the community's identity and its experience with the coast in a stronger way. And so that has to do with creating activity nodes that mix neighborhoods and visitor-oriented and small shopping areas and coastal access all in close proximity, so that people have that experience, so that you have that experience of going to the coast and having this sort of enriched experience. A continuous band of open space is conserved along the coast in this, as in all of the other alternatives, with priority open space preservation in the Wavecrest area, substantial agriculture land designated and preserved east of Highway 1 in this case, as well as west of Highway 1, but particularly on some of those areas that in the previous concept were shown as new neighborhoods. In this case, these are shown as conserved agricultural lands. And then the park system again is expanded, and in this case, a Central Park concept is shown that matches the Central Park concept from the existing park and recreation element, so that there's continuity, there's a link from the previous planning effort into this one. Looking more precisely, some of the characteristics of this alternative, the Podesta starting at the north, this concept of bringing neighborhoods and access to open space and visitor uses and so on together happens around Venice Beach up there. Again, to the south, a large site for visitor-oriented uses at the foot of Kelly Avenue, which has that sort of feedback opportunity with downtown Half Moon Bay, and then north of downtown, but within walking distance along improved sort of pedestrian environment along Main Street, you have shopping and offices on the Podesta property. Moving on to the open space and park characteristics. I mentioned the Central Park concept here, consistent with the previous planning effort. And importantly, I think, and consistently with this concept, linking into the coast and that experience of the coast, so that you're in that park, but you also are close to the coast and have that connection to the coast. Along the east side, again, you see that trail and the Foothill Boulevard right-of-way, or the Foothill Boulevard sort of route, linking neighborhoods, linking Half Moon Bay High School. And in this case, there is a trail is shown through the city's Beechwood property, through the new Central Park to the coast. So there's a clear open space connection all the way from the foothills to the coast here along as a trail. Further south, you have the coastal trail being extended further south, and also unique to this alternative, there's a trail along the Railroad Avenue. There's a sort of mostly publicly owned right-of-way parallel to Railroad Avenue. This is seen here as a trail opportunity, and one that would link the existing neighborhoods in Half Moon Bay to Smith Field for people on foot and on bikes. That's a connection that doesn't exist right now. You have to drive there on Highway 1, and linking Smith Field further to the south to Ocean Colony.
This brown color here are the bluffs over here, so you can see clearly that the bluffs are conserved, and in fact we have a band of open space around the bluffs as well here.
Bruce is reminding me to remind everyone this is a long-term plan. This is billed out as 2040. So we're talking about a lot of things happening, but it's not all happening tomorrow, unfortunately, in some cases. So just closing this one out to be consistent with the others. Circulation improvements here, Highway 1 improvements in all of them, and in this one. We have a Golden Gate Avenue connection in the northern neighborhoods. Even without neighborhoods being part of that, you would still have an opportunity potentially for a connection. And more opportunities for pedestrian crossing enhancements for Highway 1.
In terms of comparing and contrasting, well, what does it all mean in terms of population, jobs, housing units, and so on? This slide here shows existing number of housing units, what the current general plan will allow. So we have 4,400 housing units approximately in the city today. The current general plan would allow about 8,000 housing units, and each one of these concepts, the compact core and neighborhood connections and showcasing the coast, allow much lower development in the 6,200 to 6,550 sort of range, substantially less than the current general plan does. The same goes for population. We have a population of 11,700 in the city today. The current general plan will take us to almost 22,000, almost a doubling of population. Under each one of these concepts, the population growth would be more modest, anywhere from 16,337 to 17,150 approximately. We would be, we have about 600,000 square feet of retail space in the city currently. The current general plan would allow about 220,000 or so additional square feet to that. Each one of these concepts will allow for a little bit more than that to enable us to have a better inventory of retail resources, whether it's in downtown along the main street or shopping centers, if you will. These are not hugely increased numbers, but just modestly expanded numbers so that we can have a greater diversity of retail types. Similarly, for office users, people have told us it's part of the guiding principles that people desire more office space, more office incubation space, for example, spaces where incubated companies could be nurtured at least to a certain extent, and each one of these concepts provides a little bit more than what the current general plan does. In terms of hotel rooms, the current general plan provides for a lot of hotel rooms. I mean, we are at 540 rooms today. I'm not sure we'll get to 1,400 by 2040. It seems like a very far out number. Our economist doesn't believe we'll get there. So we've tried to reflect somewhat more accurate projections, if you will, of where we may land up with the hotels, and then try to locate the hotels in the places where we believe we should get them. This is a graph that compares the population we build out, where we are today, current general plan, compact core, and the other two concepts that we have. As you can see, much more modest population growth compared to the current general plan. In terms of jobs and employed residents, I talked about the total number of jobs under each concept, the total number of employed residents. These are again people who live in the city, who could be working in the city or outside the city. And this bottom line shows the balance between those two. We are at a 0.87 jobs per employed residents. We have a net deficit of jobs in the city currently, a modest net deficit. That deficit will increase in the current general plan, but under each one of these concepts, it will be much closer to 1.0, which is the ideal that we all, as planners aspire to, for example. And this is diagrammed here in terms of, this is where we are, and a better balance, getting to in the three concepts over here. In terms of open space, this drawing here shows you the coastal open space as it is in the current general plan and in the three concepts. And as you can see, there's a lot more green on these three maps. And it isn't like that the color is switched between the maps to make the green, seem more prominent. There just happens to be more green along the coast in each one of these concepts. And it's green in terms of the width we have along the coast side. It's the extent we have. It goes all the way along the coast. We have more ag land, we have more open space. And that's also seen clearly in this chart over here that we have we have this much, 1,158 acres of agricultural land in the city. We'll only get 150 remaining at the end of the current general plan, but almost double of that under each one of these concepts. In terms of open space, we have 640 acres currently. That's where we will be if the current general plan remains, but we'll be almost tripling that open space under each one of these concepts. So there is 3 times the amount of green land on the maps as well. That's why you see more green along in the concepts. In terms of active parks, the current general plan would get us to 107 acres. And that's for a population of 21 or close to it. But in terms of how we look at the park standards, which is active park acres for every 1,000 residents, we will have a lot more of it than the current general plan or the existing. We only have 1.9 acres per 1,000 residents. It's a pretty small amount. Under each one of these concepts, we'll get to 5, or 6 acres per 1,000 residents. So on a per person basis, we anticipate the active park space almost tripling. How do we get from the concepts to a preferred plan? We will, following any input that we may get today, any input from the city council, we will finalize these concepts for public discussion. We would run the transportation model, the San Mateo County transportation model we have on each one of these concepts. We will evaluate what it means for mobility, for congestion, for, on Highway 92, Highway 1. We'll present this information to people. It'll be more detailed. We'll overlay the environmental resources, for example. We'll try to get feedback from everybody. There'll be 2 public workshops, one on a weekday, one on a weekend. And we'll collect all this together. And we'll try to come up with a preferred plan that will again be vetted through the process, through the GPAC, through the Planning Commission, through the City Council, ultimately leading to a preferred plan and then more detailed policy writing and development. With that, I conclude my presentation. I'm going to turn it back to the chair for wherever you want to take it from here.
Thank you, Richard. We are going to open it up for public comment in just a couple of minutes. So if you would like to speak tonight on the record and you haven't filled out one of these green sheets, or if you haven't turned it in, please do. The green sheets are over on the table right by the door, and when it's complete, please turn it into staff and we will call you up as we get to your name. But before we do that, are there any questions for staff on the presentation or on the documents? I don't think we want to engage in a discussion of the specific concepts at this point, but Commissioner Roman.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Roman, yes.
No problem. Thank you. Yeah, just a few questions reacting to what you just presented. So just could you clarify the ratio of jobs to employed residents a little bit? So it seems to me that, does that mean, I'm assuming that you're trying to say residents employed locally, not residents that have jobs, because I'm sure a high percentage of the people that live in town have jobs, but they're over the hill. Otherwise, I'm not sure what I'm doing in traffic every day.
Right. So the jobs... Sorry, the jobs in this table represent the jobs that are actually in Half Moon Bay. Physically, these are in shop, stores, companies, or whatever. Employed residents are people who live in the city, but could work in the city or somewhere else. So with the result that we have today 5,300 jobs in the city, but we have 6,110 people who are working somewhere in Half Moon Bay or elsewhere. So we have a net deficit of about 800 jobs in the city. On a net basis, 800 more people leave Half Moon Bay. I mean, not everybody who works in Half Moon Bay lives in Half Moon Bay. There is some cross, commuting that happens. But on a net basis, we have a deficit in the city currently.
Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to understand is how informative is that statistic? Because many of those jobs could be filled by people outside of town and probably are, right? Conversely, so there's people that live in town that work outside, there's people that live outside of town that...
Right. You're absolutely right. Even if you have a perfect balance, we're not going to get rid of the cross commuting. But it just creates more opportunities in terms of a balanced community that there are, Yeah,
I understand it's a good thing. I just want to understand how to interpret the statistic. Thank you. And in the three concepts that you showed, it looked like you're not really proposing any new roads at all, or maybe I misunderstood that. So, for example, I didn't quite get what the Golden Gate Avenue connection was.
Yeah, so we do have, what I would call more modest scale connections. In the concept that we showed at the GPAC meeting, we had two major new connections. One was a Foothill Boulevard connection, the other was a Railroad Avenue. So the Foothill Boulevard actually basically was a road that went across over here, and the railroad was a road that went across over here. So we got both a bypass on the west side and a bypass on the east side, and I think we got some pushback at the time, so those have been converted to trails, but we have more modest scale roads connecting. It's not a full Foothill Boulevard, but these are the new dashed lines, other roads across over here. So that's what we're calling the Golden Gate Avenue connection. It's basically, it's a mini link on the east side between where we can do it, yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought I saw. I just wanted to confirm that. Now, the last question I have is, so it looks like many of these concepts, in implementing these, you would contemplate rezoning. And looks like things that are currently zoned, for example, urban reserve and PUD, could potentially be rezoned to open space. So I guess I just wanted to get your take on, do you see, so those are, as you pointed out earlier, that's land that's currently owned by people that pay taxes on the land and so forth, and maybe think about developing it someday. Do you anticipate any legal barriers to converting zoning through this general plan update?
We have the city attorney here.
When you're going through the general plan process like we're doing here on the comprehensive land use level, the legal issues with land use designations such as open space or conservation, there's not a per se taking just because you convert something from a PUD to open space or agricultural. Those types of determinations are made more on a case-by-case basis and would really have to take into consideration the facts at play. So I wouldn't say there's a per se legal barrier to making those changes.
And I'm not a lawyer, but the courts would, a variety of tests are in place. It would be residual value, what's the remnant use of the property, can somebody continue to do what they're doing in the property right now, and things of that nature. It would not be the city's intention to take that property to convert it to parkland. It is just that it may remain under existing agricultural use for a while. So.
Right, and if there was an analysis done and a taking determined to occur, proper compensation discussions would take place at that time when land use changes happened.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. That's all I had for now.
Thanks, Tom.
Earlier in your discussion, you mentioned that there had been an outreach to the community to get input from members of the community. Can you explain to what extent that outreach took place to all elements of our community? Including, in particular, the Hispanic community.
Right. So,
yeah, I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I'd be happy to add a little bit to here. We had what I thought was a pretty productive community meeting with the Main Street Park neighborhood folks. And I thought it was pretty well attended. We had in and out of there probably 30 or 40 people. And we're going to follow back up with them. As a matter of fact, what we've told everybody along the way, we've had probably 15 or 20 different neighborhood meetings or special group meetings or events that we've attended. So what we've told everybody is, you know, thank you for giving us the opportunity to visit with you, but we'd like to come back again. And we told that neighborhood, as we have everybody else, that we're looking forward to come back, to keep them informed and involved with the progress and process, and keep them engaged in the update process. So, and you know, we're still happy to go visit with any group or organization that would like to get us on their agenda. And we're going to continue to do that throughout the process. But the meeting that we had, the Spanish meeting, was actually facilitated in Spanish. And actually the notes are on the website, and I think on your packet too, of the comments that were made, and some of the ideas and suggestions that they had, and the impressions and things that they felt were important, and, you know, show folks where they can get more information and how they can stay informed and involved.
Bruce, how many people attended that Spanish language?
About 20, 30.
And did you have any leaders from the Hispanic community involved in bringing more members of the community to that meeting?
I think the meeting we had did have a pretty good representation. I think those were the key folks, and they were thankful that we came there, and we set up arrangements to come to them again. And they said they'd host the meeting again. And so I thought it was a pretty productive and positive meeting.
That was the one meeting, but are any other meetings scheduled?
Not right this moment, no.
All right, thanks.
That's more general, and I'm hoping that you can explain for everyone's benefit the difference between potential land uses, as are shown on these maps, and zoning districts, where, you know, there may be a land use prescribed, but that's not ultimately the zoning district. And I think, you know, some folks might see 3 or 4 different things in one spot, and it conjures up an image of a thriving commercial center and hotel and houses all in one. And that's, and I guess what I'm leading at is that's kind of where these PUD districts are. I mean, PUD district is one way to solve multiple land uses in one zoning district.
Right. I would agree with that. And just in terms of, just for the benefit of everybody else, in the hierarchy of, we have general plans designations on the top that set the policy piece, and below that we have zoning categories, which are the implementation of those policies and where the development standards and regulations occur for building height and setbacks and so forth. So those are the development standards. We have a planned development zone which corresponds to the zoning district of planned unit development. And in the case of the current general plan, we have some programmatic requirements that are specified in the general plan, which says you got to have so much resident. Each one of those planned unit developments have different numbers of residential, commercial, in some cases industrial development program for each of those 19 different areas that we have. And then the zoning corresponds to how the plan is to be implemented. And in theory, we would like to have all of the general plan designations correspond to the zoning, and in our case they pretty much do. So that's a kind of a long explanation for the concept of general plan designations and zoning as it relates to development in the plan unit development context. I hope I got it.
I wasn't leading anywhere. I just wanted to make sure that distinction was made, that these are not, we're not talking about individual zoning districts, we're talking much more broadly. And as part of the zoning designations that that will follow this. Can you talk a little bit about the potential for, I mean, we're 6 months, 9 months from now, we'll really be dialing this in, but talk about overlay or combining districts and how those sorts of districts, how they put a secondary set of requirements potentially over a set district.
Yeah, that's a final level of analysis, as we indicated at the beginning. Right now, we're talking the general plan, the designations, but the overlays and floating zones and all of those are tools, of zoning tools, and that part is forthcoming behind the general plan analysis. There's all kinds of tools that we can get into in the zoning realm when we start to talk about development standards and different kinds of tools. But at the general plan stage, it's a little bit broader and much more flexible. And when you get down to the zoning level, it narrows down and gets more towards the standards of development, and that's where the floating zone concept would be one of the tools in the box, if you will, that we might be able to explore, to use to get at.
I would just simply add that there are, as Bruce said, there are a variety of approaches. PUD, for example, is one approach to doing this. We could have performance-based zoning. We could have actual setbacks along the coast, for example. We can have overlay zones, whether it's for landslides or open space conservation or for anything else. These are tools. They have to actually help us implement the bigger picture idea. What is it that we're seeking to accomplish? And then design the tools to match with that. And I think we have flexibility moving forward. We're not be fully overhauling the zoning code, but to the extent there are general plan land use changes, policy direction changes, open space conservation changes, we will be reflecting that in the zoning ordinance. And I think we'll have a dialogue at the time that this is what we're seeking to do. Is it this approach or that approach or that approach? What's the best tool? And I think we'll have opportunity for that later on.
Yeah, it's just something I wanted to bring up because we're looking at these from 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet, and seeing the city on, in our case, one 11 by 17 sheet of paper, and where there are. You'll see the red commercial area maybe right up against a creek, and that causes concern. Or you see a residential district right up against the coastal trail. It's yikes, there's many levels of refinement that these concepts are just the beginning point to. I had this discussion with Bruce and Dante last week. As some of you know, I'm a landscape architect, and when we approach a project, we have a site and we start really broad. Whether or not we have a fine survey or a architectural footprint, our drawings are loose, hand-drawn bubble diagrams. That first pass concept is just kind of giving general indications. Do we want development here? In my case, do we want a pool here or a gazebo here, planning area there? But this is that same approach, and we have many tools to refine and hone in, and we may present concepts to a family, and the husband hates something here and the wife hates something there. But at those beginning stages, it's really important to find the things that we agree on. And really at this early stage, there's kind of two questions that we're really looking for is, where do we want development to occur? And where do we not want development to occur? I mean, that's kind of the first pass. And then from there, we can begin to talk about which kinds of development and hone in on what shape we want the development to take, how we want to integrate that development, or how we want to protect from development in some of these areas. So it's just, again, I know Dante mentioned it, I know Bruce and Rajiv mentioned it, but I want to mention again, we are early on in the process. This is a big, broad scope, And your continued engagement is really, really critical to narrow down as we go through the next few months to get to a preferred plan. Are there any other comments from commissioners? Then
I would just say that I agree with what Chair Conroy has said. I think we're looking for a vision, some idea of a general vision as to what we'd like to see our community look like, not a specific plan as to how we're going to implement that vision. So I think that's really the direction that we're going in at this initial stage.
Thank you, Phil. With that, we'll open up the public comment period. There are a number of green sheets here, and we do have a clock set up here. We would ask that, I mean, it's your 3 minutes. You can really say whatever you want, but for the interest of everyone here, it's probably in all of our best interest not to repeat the same thing over and over again, but again, it's your time. Our first green sheet is from George Mutuff. It was the first one on the table.
Great, thanks. Well, thank you. First of all, I've been to all the GPAC meetings. I'm grateful for the opportunity of the general plan. I am very grateful for the update. I'm very grateful for the members of the GPAC committee and the public that have attended. I think there's been some pretty good stuff rolling around over there. And I thought I was reasonably familiar with everything until I got here tonight. And after, between Peter and Rajiv, just kept firing those shots. My head is swimming, but I'm going to try to keep up here. I welcome the opportunity for this general plan update. There's no question that it's needed. There are multiple considerations, I think, that I have that we should have, and that would be cost and balance and listening. I attended 5 LCP update attempts. There were over 70 plus meetings in a period of, I don't know, probably 10 months, something like that. As I've looked around the room, I've seen that there are several people, and a couple up there as well, that were part of that process, and it was exhausting and challenging. And this is a contrast in approach, and I can see benefits and drawdowns to both sides, but so far I like this one a little bit better. I would just suggest that we look at substance versus speed or timeline. I think the end result is more important than the speed at which we get that result. I am hopeful that public interests will prevail over special interests, that local interests are balanced with and against visitor interests. I am hopeful that we create options rather than eliminate or restrict them. I think it's important when you're trying to solve a problem, create as many options as you can. It's easy to pair them off. It's not easy to, once you've restricted them, to bring them back. I would be wary of extremes. For example, I've heard people say, I said this at the last meeting, no development west of Highway 1. That's a pretty radical comment. And to me, that would be an extreme. I would be more interested in looking for middle ground, and I'm hopeful that you guys will do that. I know you're our land use experts, and you've all had a very, very long and challenging road to this point. I know you know your stuff. The key here is listening to all input and taking emotion out of it, placing personal interest behind public interests, and really working together. And that's going to be the key to getting something that I think would be representative of what we're looking for, and that's the best plan we can get going forward. The general plan, as has been stated, is an overview. It's a 30,000-foot view, and it should be, I believe, somewhat of a flexible view. The LCP and LUP update is where the real action will be, and that's where the real details are, and I think that's what the chair was just discussing. There'll be plenty of time for fussing and fighting then, but let's try to, if we can just get to this and really kind of scope it out, I think it would be a huge benefit for us. I would offer an example that this is an opportunity to add gateways to the general plan. We've had this discussion before. I think the building at the corner of 92 and Highway 1 was at a gateway, and there was some discussion here on this board and in other locations about gateways, but there's really no designation. This is an opportunity to put that in there. But the details to that designation should be in the LCP-LUP update, which again I think speaks to what Chair Conroy had discussed. It kind of almost reminds me, and I'm just maybe ahead of myself here, but it kind of reminds me of Microsoft and Apple. Both great companies, both great products, both very interested in themselves at first and fought tooth and nail, and as over time have more melded together, and it's benefited us all. And I'm hopeful that this will do the same. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mutaf. Next green sheet is from Eduardo, and following Eduardo is Jerry Steinberg.
Hi, my name is Eduardo Magaña, and I live in 527 Silver. And the only reason I'm here is because I'm not agree with the freeway going on the top of the high school. I moved to a small town to live like a small town person, and this is creating a freeway in the area where we live is just not what we want. And the other part you guys was talking about the Sony. I don't understand what Sony means when you guys allow building a commercial lot into a residential house. So what is this? If I know somebody, I can build it where I want in town? I'm not happy the way things are going in the town. I live here for 40 years. I'm happy to be in the area, but I'm happy to see what is coming. If you guys looking to deal with some traffic, why don't build it a walking bridge where Lemurs Ranch is, or those Poncan places where the traffic is stopped complete? Those are points where I don't think the traffic, if it was a walking bridge just for people to walk on the top of the 92, was not that much traffic on there. Was not so many people waiting in that spot. That's only an idea, you can take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moreno. Jerry Steinberg, followed by Ann Carey.
First, I'd like to echo pretty much what George described, so I don't have to repeat it. What I'm really would like to address is that the concepts that have been presented are good, but they need to be beefed up. And what I mean by beefing up is, I don't think that you can wait until later and then consider drainage issues, traffic issues. They got to be considered now when you're looking at this and when you're laying this out. Don't think you can wait. I'm not saying you're at 30,000 feet, you got to come down to maybe 15,000 feet, but you can't wait, because a lot of just like happened at the last GPAC meeting, John Ward, who is a former supervisor for San Mateo County and representing Alianto Properties, described that the extension of Foothill Boulevard would cut right through the heart of the approved 63 homes that the Coastal Commission has approved. So, I mean, it shouldn't even have been there to begin with, but it was there. Okay, so yeah, pick that up. The city really has allowed islands of development over the past 50 years with little consideration of circulation other than Highway 1. The proposed back exit on Quartz Avenue for the Podesta property is another example of attempting to cut through established Highlands subdivision and eventually exiting on Highway 1, either on a local 36th Street, which is Terrace, which obviously I'm interested in since I live there, and or it's going to go on, I love it, it's going to go on Golden Gate Avenue into Beechwood, but if it goes into Beechwood, it's going directly into wetlands. It's going into habitat. How are you going to get around that? It doesn't help the folks on Grandview, Spindrift Lake development. So I think that before discussing development of the Podesta property or some of these other ideas that you have, that you need to figure out what are some of these other considerations. It's been brought up several times, but I think we need to beef up the concepts so that some of this stuff, as an architect that I work with, some of this looks like cartoons. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steinberg. Ann Carey, followed by Ed Love.
Good evening, I'm Ann Carey. I'd like to point out that there are vacant buildable parcels within the existing subdivisions, which the owners desire to develop and which are currently not shown on the concept maps. I think it's important that they're not forgotten as the planning process goes forward. I understand that the land use is not proposed to be changed, but they still are opportunities for building. And second, in the Venice Beach PUD, I'm unclear as to whether the concepts are proposing to eliminate the PUD zoning land use. And I apologize, I still don't quite understand the difference in the process and the difference of land use, general plan, and zoning. But it seems on the map that's shown right now that what's being proposed in the Venice Beach PUD is that one landowner's parcel is designated as commercial. The next landowner, his neighbor, is residential, and the neighbor next to him is open space. And I think that if you're designating the zoning for individual different landowners within this PUD, it's problematic and it's arbitrary, because no one knows what can be built within this PUD until a project comes forward and the environmental studies are done and the wetlands, or if any environmental area. One parcel, if you on the outset designate it as commercial, it may not be the optimal parcel, and that the parcels designated as open space within that PUD are the optimal parcels. There are definite problems with PUD zoning. I believe that really need to be addressed, or even perhaps there can be development of some kind of modified type of zoning. But one of the benefits of PUD is that it does provide for the delineation of any environmental areas if they're present. It requires that, as was mentioned, that any kind of development would be clustered. There has to be percentages of open space. View corridors have to be protected, and so it's a somewhat balanced approach. I think the proposed concepts are beneficial in providing information of what's desired in the area, if you wanted visitor serving, commercial, or whatever. But I think the idea of designating the usage of which parcels within the area will do so is problematic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Curie. Mr. Love, followed by Lenny Roberts.
Good evening. My name is Ed Love. I'm an architect here in Half Moon Bay. Before we moved to the coast side in '95, I was involved in the general plan and the downtown specific plan in Petaluma, and also the river plan and the unreinforced masonry plan. So I learned quite a bit in going through that whole process over those years. And one of the things that really struck home to me is the elements of the general plan are all very important. Open space, parks, trails are all very good, and no one wants to diminish those. And Rajiv has described how they're actually, under the proposed concepts, that they're actually going to be increased, which is great. But all the elements of the general plan are important. They all need to be considered. Focusing on one or two elements will be very unproductive and won't result, I don't think, in a better Half Moon Bay. I urge everyone, the GPAC, which I am a member of, the Planning Commission, the City Council, everybody in Half Moon Bay, and everybody in the coast side. Half Moon Bay is not an island. It's not like they say in Vegas that whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Whatever happens in Half Moon Bay affects the whole coast side, from the tunnels all the way down to Pescadero. We're all after the same result here, a better Half Moon Bay. So every element of the general plan is intertwined, they all affect each other. So keep a very broad outlook, consider every element, not just the element that is sort of the thing that you like to focus on, and we will have a better Half Moon Bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalom. Lenny Roberts, followed by Mike Ferrera.
Good evening, I'm Lenny Roberts. I'm speaking for Committee for Green Foothills. We sent you a letter, which I think you've all received. I'm just going to highlight some of the points in there. First of all, nearly all of the discussion in this entire process has been about the general plan, while the much more challenging job of updating the LCP has been treated as an afterthought. If you don't place this ambitious planning effort into the context of the regulatory framework, particularly the relevant Coastal Act policies, at the beginning, and if you only ask what do people want or desire or envision in the general plan, you'll waste everybody's time and create conflict at the end of this process when it comes time to amend the LCP. Secondly, without the proper baseline information as to the sensitive habitats and other coastal resources, all of the lovely colored blocks on the 3 concept maps, which are very helpful to see, and the warm, fuzzy themes and concepts and alternatives, which are terms that have been used somewhat interchangeably, are premature. We need to go back to the basic principles of what are the constraints to both planning and development. We know a lot about what these constraints are, yet many of them have either been ignored or inadequately described. The city has numerous maps and delineations of wetlands in its possession. Also, the Municipal Code Section 8.38020 requires the planning director to prepare and maintain maps of all designated coastal resource areas within the city. The LCP map that we have from 1983 does not satisfy this. The habitat maps in the existing conditions report does not satisfy this either, even though they're nice colors, but they don't adequately contain all of the wetlands that we know about. So I think that that's really important as a starting point. Some parcels that were shown on the maps for the last GPAC meeting are eligible for development are already restricted per conditions of approval for adjacent development, such as the Guerrero Avenue PUD, which was shown at that meeting as on all 3 concept maps as housing. It's not available for housing. Beechwood and Glen Cree have significant areas of wetlands and associated buffers on maps that we have all been made very well aware of. So visitor serving commercial shown on 2 concepts is extremely limited there, if not impossible. Foothill Boulevard, we've already discussed that, and I hope that that's kind of been put aside, but it's just not possible to amend the Coastal Commission's conditions of approval and the settlement agreement that the city is a part of to change those conditions or the map. Third, realistic baseline build-out numbers are needed. There's been a lot of emphasis tonight. Got 1 more minute as an organization, thank you. All the concepts represent substantially less population build-out than in the existing general plan. That's a misleading statement because the LCP and the general plan recognized that residential development in those PUDs was a maximum for planning purposes, and constraints such as topography, flood hazards, sensitive habitats, and steep slopes would reduce that maximum allowable density. And Pacific Ridge is a good example. That PUD called for 228 homes. That was reduced through the planning process to 63. Other PUD areas such as South Wavecrest, which had a potential for 1,000 units of housing that are on this baseline, has become a golf course, so that's not even there anymore. So a significant constraint to development within the PUD or urban reserve areas is the legality of hundreds of small lots within antiquated subdivisions that were created in the early 1900s. There are two recent Court of Appeal decisions known as Witt and Abernathy that are determined that if individual contiguous lots within these subdivisions have been in common ownership since they were created, they're not separate legal parcels. We also mentioned the deficiency of parks, public parks, and the importance of open space and conservation element. Thank you very much for mentioning that tonight. We also support maintaining agricultural uses. We have some of the best prime agricultural lands on the coast in Half Moon Bay, especially on both sides of Pilarcitos. And we would like to see support measures for maintaining and enhancing the agricultural economy, particularly open field agriculture. San Mateo County has a resource management zone. You might want to look at that as a zoning concept for some of these areas that would be both open space preservation as well as resource-based uses. So my final comment is that the maps have 3 areas that are outside the city's jurisdiction. One's along Highway 92, the Johnston House, and several nurseries, the Caltrans Corporation Yard and Rice Soil Farm in the south part. Those are in the rural unincorporated areas, and there's no reason for those to be part of your general plan or LCP because they're outside the city limits, outside the urban-rural boundary, and outside the city's sphere of influence. They should be deleted. I know that you're going to be involved in planning for those areas in the future when the county does anything, but especially along Highway 92. But it's important to leave the county's jurisdiction as the county area and the city's jurisdiction as a city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. Mike Ferreira, followed by Dennis Paul.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. On behalf of the Sierra Club, as the conservation chair for the Loma Prieta chapter, I'll just say that I will save you a lot of time. I think I'll have to say that maybe for the first time in my memory, I'm also going to agree with everything that Jerry Steinberg said. And the reason for that is that the map that shows the Golden Gate Avenue connector has to go through Beechwood in order to meet the ends. And the city attorney in his 2009 wetlands report produced numerous maps for Beechwood, and the final 2 concluding maps, even the map with no buffer zones, you still cannot take a road from one end of Golden Gate to the other. You just can't do it. It's impossible. That's kind of, I think, a little bit of maybe an institutional memory problem, which we hear once in a while that we have. Regarding the PUDs, I really don't understand where this get rid of the PUDs thing came from, or what the drive was for that, because it's kind of an elegant solution, really, from a few decades ago, to try and deal with these antiquated subdivisions. These subdivisions were drawn on these little tiny 25-foot lots with no regard for resources because 110 years ago, there was no such thing as resources. It's the closest thing to classic California land fraud that ever existed. There was no water, no streets, no power. There was almost no reason for those lots to have existed when they were plotted. Some, I heard, were given away as raffle prizes by the railroad. So that's a mess for the city to have to try and deal with. Take away the PUD, then how do you deal with that mess? Especially with, as Lenny Roberts pointed out, the Witt and Abernathy decisions, which are really complicated to deal with. So under the PUD, the landowners have to get together and solve those problems. Take away the PUD, you get the problems. And I don't see how you're going to resolve that with no redevelopment anymore. So I am pleased to see that there's a different motion in these plans from the meeting at GPAC. that some things are getting a little bit better, but I will just say that the commissioners have said you need the resources first to understand what you do around the resources. That I think is a very important point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferreira. Dennis Paul, followed by Frank Garrity. Mr. Paul?
Yes, this is Dennis Paul. I live 229 Correas in the Alsace area. I'd like to try to incorporate in people's thinking a little high school mathematics. We talk about a 1% limit, a growth limit, or whatever it might be. That's a proposal that corresponds to exponential growth. And exponential growth goes to any arbitrarily large number given a certain amount of time. And it's very clear to me that we can't have a very large number here and still maintain a small town and with adequate open space and protected species and such. It's not going to happen. So I would like to think that we could not talk about percentage growth rates, but talk about the build out. What's the ultimate number that we don't want to go beyond? And from a traffic point of view, I think it's very clear that there needs to be some kind of number like that. Whether these plans incorporate that, they talk about what are you going to do by 2040, or what are you going to do by 2060? If you continue to grow at the rate that we grow between now and 2040 and project that past, then that's not sustainable. You can't do that. It won't go there. The other thing that's not been talked about here is infill. And I think in my neighborhood, and I've got 2 vacant lots, one behind me, one alongside of me. There's vacant lots scattered all around through town, and I don't know what the total number is, but I would think that that's the first order of business is to fill in those vacant areas that are in existing neighborhoods before we talk about expanding to new neighborhoods. The principles that are outlined by the proposal here included small town charm. How small is a small town? If you talk about doubling the population or even increasing by 50%, is that still a small town? How do you create charm in a rapidly growing city? And I think those are considerations that haven't had enough discussion. The concept of sustainability, I think, is really important. And, okay, let me go real quick. I think that we should improve the quality of our lifestyle, not the quantity. I think there's a lot that can be done to make the town nicer without bigger. And I'd like to talk about the state parks very quickly. The state parks currently have a certain amount of the land that you talk about as being green over here. But the state parks have a very limited budget, and they simply cannot handle double or triple the amount of visitors coming to visit the coast. They boundary a significant part of the coastline for the city, and you can't put a lot more people there and still get protection for species. I was a volunteer there for 10 years, and it isn't going to happen. I think there's some things you can do, but that's not one of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Next is Frank Garrity, followed by Doreen Garrity.
Frank Garrity, Silver Avenue, Commission City Staff. This is the season of wishes. The survey conducted, the greatest wish of the people, the most loudly spoken wish, and the most repeated wish is for more open space. Well, you cannot make more open space.
You can only preserve the open space we already have. The public demands that the remaining open space in Half Moon Bay not be paved over and built upon. It is the small size of our town, the large amount of open space that gives Half Moon Bay its beauty, its charm, its character, and makes it so unique and such a special place. It is the reason we live here, and the reason we put up with long commutes. It is worth the long drives to come home to this beautiful, unique, and special place. If you pave over and ruin the small town and open space feel, if you turn Half Moon Bay into another San Mateo or Redwood City, then what is the point of living here? The quality of life will be diminished, our home values will drop, and we will have a harder time selling our homes if we ever do have to leave this beautiful place. It is also the reason that tourists flood over the hill to stay in our hotels, dine in our restaurants, and buy in our shops. While people come from all over the world, the vast majority come from within the Bay Area. And this is a testament that even within the spectacular Bay Area, we are unique and have something special. Again, if you pave over, ruin the small town open space feel, turn Half Moon Bay into San Mateo and Redwood City, the tourists will stop coming. Our hotels, restaurants, and shops will lose much of their income. The city will lose much of its tax revenue. The public has spoken loudly, strongly, clearly, and frequently. Keep the town small, keep the space open. Second point I'm making tonight, this will be quicker. I speak for many people within the Highland Park neighborhood who do not want new roads connecting our neighborhood with Main Street 92 to the south and other neighborhoods to the north. We are a quiet residential cul-de-sac type of neighborhood with no through traffic. It is one of the reasons many of us choose to live in this neighborhood. We are a neighborhood filled with families, children, pets, cats, and dogs. While children and pets should not be in the street, in reality, they do occasionally dart out unexpectedly. Older children also do intentionally play ball and play games in our streets. And neighbors living across the street from each other cross the streets back and forth to chat. These are things that give our neighborhood a small town feel and make it a desirable place to live. It is the responsibility of this city, this commission, and city council to protect its neighborhoods. Do not make Highland Park neighborhood an alternate to Highway 1, where drivers will exit the highway and will speed through our quiet streets to beat the time they would make on Highway 1. Instead, wide barrier. Keep high speed, high volume, highway traffic on the highway and out of our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garrity. Doreen Garrity, followed by Pam Fisher.
Good evening. My name is Doreen Garrity. I live on Silver Avenue in Highland Park neighborhood, and I'm here tonight to express my concerns over the GPAC plan. I see a lot of new development with no improved infrastructure. However, I do see on all three plans that there's a plan to connect the east side neighborhoods via residential roads starting and ending through Highland Park neighborhood through the Courts Avenue. And I'm with Jerry and Mike and Lenny. First of all, I don't know how you can do that to get through Beechwood with the wetlands. But if you end up doing that, I just want to let you know that this is not an option. Our quiet residential neighborhood will become an alternate access road to Highway 1. So why not just expand Highway 1 and make it 4 lanes, 2 lanes in each directions, and also include a pedestrian access with safety barriers. So there's no reason to open up the east side neighborhood to car traffic. But if the neighborhood wants to be connected to all the neighborhoods north, why not connect them with a bike and pedestrian path? Bike and pedestrian paths would be a huge benefit to all the east side neighborhoods. So I'm encouraging the planning commissioners and the GPAC committee to not accept any of the current concepts as drawn. Residents of Half Moon Bay have said over and over they want to preserve our charm of our city preserve the charm of our city by not adding all this additional development. Preserving the charm is not a new desire from current residents of Half Moon Bay. On December 7th in 1978, in the Half Moon Bay Review article, the former mayor, Mel Mello was quoted saying, "Although growth may be a financial boost to the city, Half Moon Bay should strive to maintain its rural atmosphere. We've always been a little town that's quite different from the fast-paced cities. This is one of the most distinctive features about Half Moon Bay, and I feel that with reason we should try to keep it that way." So what would former Mayor Mello think of all these developments? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Beardy. Pam Fisher, followed by Harvey Rarbach.
Boy, I have an easy job after, I'm just going to say ditto on the last several speakers. I'm going to take it down, not from 2,500 feet, but right down to the road level. Bottom line is, my concern is that your present circulation element is inadequate. The existing highway with some turns off on Highway 1 is not going to even solve the present problem we have on a regular work day. I live in Highland Park. I'm looking at Highway 1 from Silver Avenue and Terrace Avenue, and that traffic is ridiculous. We ended up moving there 11 years ago simply because we didn't want to have to deal with the issue. It was when the school buses stopped and all of the traffic. We looked at Montero, but there was no way we were going to handle that traffic. So we're right next to 92. However, we're a community, and we need to speak for everybody in the community. What I'm concerned about is time frame. Right now, we have children who cannot get to the high school. There is no sidewalk on 2/10 of a mile from Terrace Avenue to Main Street. It is a safety hazard. There is no way for these kids to get to the high school except through our yards, as we have made available to those of them that know who we are, and we've offered to come through our backyards to access the high school. So my concern is your present circulation element. I do not believe it is sufficient to deal with the traffic issues as they presently exist for commuter traffic, never mind visitor traffic, on Highway 1. 92, there are some interesting concepts in terms of crossovers and bridges, whatever, but right now, safety issues, I don't want to see someone injured on Highway 1. There are no sidewalks for our kids. It is not safe. That's an immediate need. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Harvey Rarbach, followed by Sarah Hayden.
Good evening, Commissioners. Harvey Rarbach, 464 Pine Avenue. I'm a director on the Coastside Fire Protection District, but I'm speaking as a private citizen. I think the most creativity that the consultants have given us is the names of the so-called themes or alternatives. They're great names. They make you warm and fuzzy, but I think they're radical changes to what we need and have had existing. I think there's much too much development allowed in these so-called themes. It goes against what the wishes of the people in the, what do they call it, the plan, so we need to consider, in addition, all of the environmental considerations that have been ignored, the wetlands on Redondo Beach Road, for example, the environmental sensitive habitats. None of that is really spelled out in any of these so-called themes. So I would urge us to really start to do what the City Council did with the Main Street Bridge, a reset, and take these themes ab initio and make it so that it is consistent with what the wishes of the people are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rarbach. Sarah Hayden, followed by Rick Hernandez.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hayden. I live on Silver Avenue in Highland Park, and I
don't know the legalities of the land that a lot of people have already talked about tonight, but I just do want to reiterate that extending Golden Gate and making it go through and connecting neighborhoods is just going to make it a bypass. Bypasses are dangerous. They create a lot of traffic, congestion, and smog. With cars, they'll just start stopping on Golden Gate as they try to get around Highway 1. It'll just create lineups there. And we're a family-oriented neighborhood. We do have kids who play in the street, and that would be dangerous for them to start bringing a lot of traffic through there. It would also, eventually, if we did have to sell it, it would reduce our property values. We're very concerned about that. And before you would even consider doing anything like that, we would want you to consider widening Highway 1 before even trying to start going through neighborhoods. And just perhaps keeping in mind the pedestrian nature we have a lot around here. If you need to go through those neighborhoods, make it a footpath, bike path. A bridle path would be great for people who like to ride. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hayden. Rick Hernandez, followed by Sarah Polgar.
Good evening, I'm Rick Hernandez with Friends of the Coastal Trail. I also live on 360 Poplar Street. I submitted a letter that's included in your packet. I also submitted a petition signed by more than 3,200 people that included nearly 500 written comments asking the City of Half Moon Bay and the General Planning Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission to protect open space and to keep our coastal trails and other public lands accessible and usable. I would like to thank city staff and Diet and Badia for your work. I know you've already incorporated some of the feedback that it came from the last planning meeting. And I just want to comment first and foremost that I feel like this is becoming a constructive dialogue. So thank you. I want to echo the concerns shared by the Sierra Club. In particular, the PUDs and other existing zoning have actually protected our cherished land for decades. Given our spotty record on legal issues as a city, I would encourage us not to make changes to the PUDs lightly. They do strike a balanced approach with conservation and development rights. I would also like to echo the concerns that were shared by the committee with Green Foothills and others that we provide overlay maps. I think one of the members of the Planning Commission requested such a thing. These overlay maps should provide current maps of wetland, areas of environmental concern, areas where we can't develop. I agree with the concept of, hey, we're doing some quick sketches, coming up with some concepts. I think we have some concepts here. But before we go any further and we do public workshops, I think we really need to, as Mike said, beef it up a little bit. Make sure we're having dialogue in an area where it's appropriate. One element notably missing from the last GPAC meeting, which was specifically requested by Sarah Polgar, and I believe Mr. Bhatia made this, recorded this comment, was we asked for a lower rate of growth within the city. Currently, we are at 200%, we have 200% of the capacity that we need for our housing needs for the next 7 years. Projecting forward on the current rate of growth from the regional housing needs analysis for the next 25 years, my calculation says we need less than 1,000 new homes or new housing units. The least or the most conservative plan on here has 1,798 more units than we do now. We need to look at our existing rate of growth and let's dial it down. We don't need a 25-year plan. We need a longer-term plan. And finally, I just want to say, open space shouldn't be a single option on one of the plans. It's core to what we want as a community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Sarah Polgar, followed by Hazel Jonas.
Hi, I'm Sarah Polgar. I'm a resident on Poplar Street, and I'm also a member of the General Plan Advisory Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. I actually have been crossing off lots of comments because I've heard a lot of things that I would strongly support, and in particular what Rick just spoke to. I do want to point out that I'm pretty troubled by some of the misleading information that was presented tonight, and really I think that we need to be clear that rezoning the PUDs to open space really opens the door to takings lawsuits, which would happen. And I think anytime we talk about a legal issue related to takings, we're talking about a lot of money that the city doesn't have. And so I think that this kind of this is again what Rick just spoke to and others did as well. We really need to think carefully about that. A second point relates to the existing general plan. I heard a strong or an emphasis tonight on positioning the existing general plan as deficient or in limiting growth and protecting open space. But what's interesting is that it was also pointed out that our build out under the existing general plan was supposed to be 21,000 units by 2000, I think it was. I tried to jot it down really quickly. Well, the reason that we're here, at less than half of that in 2014 is precisely because the existing general plan actually, in practice, limits growth and protects open space. So it's working on those two counts. So why would we throw it out the window as because these concepts really do? We need to go back and start with the general plan and then make those incremental changes that we need to deal with the existing problems we have, for instance, the traffic. And we really do need to consider those. Now that we have some ideas, we can't just move forward as if we can ignore all these other issues that need to be considered. We now need to use those tools and think about them, use them at this stage, not later on once we've got kind of more of a cooked, what we think is a cooked plan. That's not the time to do it. So I strongly encourage the Planning Commission and the staff and the consultants to think about taking a step back and looking at the existing general plan and making those incremental changes that will help us deal with the problems, but also keep our small town character and our open space, and we'll deal with the issues we have and also really help be consistent with the guiding principles, which were also presented earlier today and should reflect what the community wants. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Polgar. Hazel Johannes.
Good evening. My name is Hazel Johannes, and I live on 229 Valdez Avenue. I just want to say thank you very much for taking comment today. I generally work across the nation working after communities have been devastated by disasters, and I've been on very many long-range general planning processes for cities nationwide, including Joplin, including Sandy recovery in New York and New Jersey and several others. So in coming to this meeting, I was very surprised to see the process that was used for the general plan update. I'm here today because of those concerns and the proposed concepts which were prepared by the city's consultants. The city's general plan advisory committee devoted much of their personal time to offer their viewpoints to the city consultants. However, during the GPAC meeting on November 13, 2014, it became very apparent to me that the city's consultants had not taken into considerations the comments and perspectives of some members of the GPAC when developing the conceptual ideas presented to you today. In fact, at the meeting, some GPAC members voiced that none of the three concepts represented all 6 guiding principles which our community requested during the community outreach sessions. I tend to agree with those GPAC members. Since that November 14th meeting, it was brought to my attention that several GPAC members believe that the public must be told what they want because the public is incapable of knowing what they want. I was very surprised at this comment, knowing that working across the nation, a lot of the public know exactly what they want for the communities. Those members that made those comments likened the general plan to professions where clients pay for presenting conceptual renditions of certain types of housing or landscape, and I understand what you just said earlier today. I want you to know that the general plan process is a public process. It must take input from the whole community. We are not clients or customers. We are the government. We are taxpayers and our residents who live and play and nourish our souls in Half Moon Bay. We are the fabric of our community. Half Moon Bay is what we make it. And if change is required, we must work together to come to a common understanding. The proposals presented today, the three proposals that were talked about today, appear to be decisive in nature. They have the appearance of themes reminiscent of arguments for development versus protection of the environment. The concepts did not appear to take in consideration the provincial interests of our unique neighborhoods in the city. As an example, all three concepts bring more traffic through Cali Avenue west of Highway 1. This directly affects the existing residential neighborhoods directly north of and south of Cali. If I could have a minute. Take input from the whole community. If one looks closely, we are not clients of these three concept customers. Position some neighborhoods to increase in property value while other neighborhoods to decrease. And our residents the intent of the general planning process and nourish our souls dissonance amongst our neighbors. We are the fabric of our community. All three concepts reassign land use designations, and if changes for decades have been accepted by the community to come to a common understanding. These reassignments of land use proposals presented in the three proposals that were talked about today to already appear to be decisive in nature. Circulation. They have the appearance. Ask yourselves, how does traffic congestion for development, increasing the number of lanes on Highway 92 or Highway 1, lend itself to maintain did not appear to take in consideration the provincial I'm wondering if the planning consultants conducted a thorough evaluation of the existing general plan. As an example, determined all three guiding principles bring more traffic present within the current land use designation. This directly affects the existing residential plan was not evaluated in that directly nor should be. In south of Cali, if I could have a minute. The city officials conduct neighborhood specific planning sessions to determine which concept customers position some land use designation property value in their neighborhood. Taxpayers. I like the current designation and our residents outside the general planning process. Nourish our soul. I propose this to be the fabric of the city officials all three concepts that the changes in land use designation which would themselves have been accepted by the zoning ordinance. These reassignments of land must also be presented to the public with accurate more definitions of what already is really means in the concept. Ask yourselves, how does traffic congestion so I respectfully request that the planning commission or the environment council lend to the planning and implementation of consideration each neighborhood. I'm wondering if the planning consultant by existing plan are required in the city with respect as an example six guiding principles that were determined by our current land Highway 1. There is no directly affects residential plan within one planning process directly nor should one city will proposed and one code. City officials conduct
I like the current and our residents followed by Josh.
My name is David Minner. I'm at 539 Silver Avenue in Half Moon Bay. I'm here this evening because I have three children and concerned about their ability to play safely in front of our home. We're new to Half Moon Bay. We want a community that has a small town feel. We want someplace safe for our children to play and grow. All the proposed plans have designs that will allow cars to divert off the main roadway as if toward neighborhoods in attempts to reach direct destinations more quickly, to allow bypassing traffic by going through our living areas. While traffic studies have been done to assess the present situation, what studies have been done to address these designs and the necessary mitigation measures needed to address any related safety issues. I urge you to consider the safety of our children and our neighborhoods. Thank you for your attention this evening. My name is David 539 Silver Avenue in Half Moon Bay. I'm here this evening because I have three children
Unless there's anyone else that wants to speak, if you do, please quickly tell the commission.
We're new to Half Moon Bay. We want a community that has some real feel, someplace safe for our children to play.
Answer questions. So all the things I would like to see plans by now that will allow cars to divert some point when you're going to have like a dialogue back and forth and you can ask questions during presentation or in a more quickly way. I agree with what's going to be said about the three plans. There seems to be a lot of change. I was wondering if the plan to kind of take a view from the kind of minimal impact and the necessary take on communities that site and kind of deal with the biggest uncertainty that some people are doing just with the traffic. I haven't heard people say we need more retail space along the ocean side up there, or what looks like it could be like a Target or a Walmart at the end of Kelly, which looks, convenient shopping, but I'd also like to hear that one thing for zones or like visitor / commercial space. In layman's terms, maybe what means in animation, so I don't have all the changes language, but maybe you could explain at some point down the road when something is said, hey, we're going to have a commercial center, at some point could someone say, hey, I thought this one was a commercial center, not related to Taco Bell, basically just one tag those areas, because all it takes is someone buying it, kind of take the lead for a bit, their best intentions, they take on change these, and all of a sudden we have things that no kind of ideal with it. Another question, it also with traffic, agricultural land, heard people say turned from 1,100, I think the number was, acres, down to 300 or what acres. Target on 25% healthy, which looks, again, from a way we can run through, but how does that happen? Is that also like a developer coming in and zone, or is the city saying, hey, now we're going to flash on the developer? What is that, open farmland language, maybe technically it's like a state that I don't think I don't have all those parts, so, how does that happen, basically, if you guys develop things, at some point, you can't say exactly how it happened, but what is the transformation that we just not people see where there was a Taco Bell and now there's something else. Once tag those types of scenarios. Also, I don't know, because you guys take the view for a bit, water, like if there's a water, probably building this whole process, but I think that's obviously a concern that another question, my neighbor today just said, he was talking about it turns from 1,100 to strong opinion, but again, I don't know how that's impacted by all the 12% how they see all the charts, but we can run again when there can be back and forth dialogue, or if you guys were to the city saying that maybe it's too fast to developer, what is that, how does that happen? Public comment. Exactly how it happens.
I would suggest we take a 5-minute break, get out, circulate, and then come back to have some discussions up here also between the commissioners and the staff. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Process, but that's probably just saying, how that's impacted by all the 25% how they see all this charts, but how did that enforce that law? Or if you guys were to see
Advisory Committee doing, and pretty much pick it up again. So the idea was the General Plan Advisory Committee do a lot of the heavy lifting to lay out three alternatives that simplify the job for the community. But as you see it, there's a lot of work to continue to hear the community needs, and this will be open and invite everybody in the community to show up and share the good ideas and weigh in on this. And there could be a number of different formats to have to really figure out exactly how we're going to work at it. But it'll be open to the entire community, targeting February, possibly March, or most likely February. The next council meeting, council work session, study session is January 20th, and then we're targeting another community workshop, pretty much picking up again February possibly. The idea where we can get more involved in some hands-on exploring some of these kinds of stuff, identifying what the common themes are that we can agree on. There's a lot of work in, and then to simplify it, to say, well, we need to kind of invite everybody to plan and pre-show up, and share the good ideas, we don't want to change anything on the website, how we're going to work at it. Those are the same concepts that we're rolling with now, but formalize that and modify any other plan to make sure every concept that we're exploring studies like we have been doing thus far. If there are targeting, for example, parks that we may not even pick up that are interesting, general plan idea where we can get more of those involved. And the same with, for example, agricultural area, identifying what the council areas are, to simplify it, to say, well, we can reduce all of those areas, and create those connections in the community. So I think we can agree, we don't want to change in our next work session, we want to take it to the next step, how we're refine that. Those are the same kinds of materials suggested now, but we formalize that, modify where we're at, make sure another community meeting, and several other meetings like this, but it's subsequently we have an advisory committee. If there are planning, for example, the council we made next year, general plan idea where we can get more of those involved. And the same with, for example, agricultural area. Questions to simplify it, to say, well, again, this is a process. You create those connections from many people tonight and in our next week session on the subject of how to refine that. Those are the two kinds of materials. Could you maybe help us what should we as planning commissioners, how do we fit in the process? I mean, if yea or nay goes to the city council, we have to put something on paper, but they're involved too. So, what our process are. Sure, ultimately, we are hoping to narrow down to a first plan to simplify it, and because it's a general plan amendment, the planning commission is required to make a recommendation to the council on that. So, next week, we're doing a lot of the heavy lifting now, by general plan advisory committee, and ultimately, this is a study session, but it will eventually come back to once we have dialogue commissioners first plans that the community is comfortable with the process, and I'll come back to the planning commission to act on that and provide a recommendation to the council. And then again, the council will have a hearing, so to hear from the community they want to fine tune it the question I think so you'll present a recommendation and ultimately narrow down and decide what they would like to do, and then beyond that, those will get integrated into the local coastal plan, and that will ultimately be submitted for certification to the coastal commission. So, we're about a year in nature, and ultimately, how the study session here on the one preferred child plan concept.
But a lot of people here want to know whether that's the tell me how that fits with together.
In the work program, the idea is to get policy setting in place so that we can all agree on what the big picture policies are and how we want to implement the land use. And changes are necessary, and that's what the general plan update is. Once the policies are established, then we can get down to some regulatory standards. That's the next step following the general plan update. So I would envision we would start working on zoning ordinance and getting general plan concepts in more depth and tools that we might use for zoning in about a year and a half. So that's the second part of it.
Yeah, that's once we have the work program, we need a housing element so that we can all agree that fits our circulation plan and so on. So help me out on timing, things like that.
Right. Well, there's 7 regulatory elements that's in the general plan. And the difference about housing in the general plan is that in this general plan, is that the time horizon is 45 years. And then state mandated following the housing element which you just reviewed. I would envision coming start working also at the 116 council conference. It's a shorter time frame. It's only, it has an 8-year time cycle. So it's a much shorter time frame. And there are specific regulations that we have to comply with in terms of state housing law to justify that we meet our regional housing assessment for affordable. So that we can only that residential circulation plan, which is kind of different. The housing element, right? Well, it's 7 mandatory elements. That's about it. It's on an 8-year cycle. The difference about housing in the general plan is extended for 25 years. The time horizon, all these other elements. One of the speakers mentioned is yes, all these elements work together, and they're complementary, and they all work together in the same direction.
I think some of the speakers were addressing the issue of the fact that the circulation element seems to be the main focus. Their concerns about transportation on Highway 1, Highway 92, and I think that the circulation element we've discussed before can determine very much what the general plan can look like, but obviously it's one of the elements to be incorporated into the general plan. It's almost like does the tail wag the dog? Because a lot of what we put into the general plan will be determined in many respects by the circulation element, or it will be affected by it. So I think an explanation as to where do you place the highest priority? Where do you place your focus? And do you focus on the circulation element, or do you focus on the general plan? Or are they working in complement with each other? Because they really are interdependent.
They're the only way to do it. They have to be considered together, and just make sure that we embody the guiding principles, and we believe we have all of these. To all of these embody those principles to more or less in each of these concepts.
But the circulation element will change as we are coming up with different concepts about the general plan as well. Because
Absolutely.
We're looking at different alternatives on the general plan, which obviously will impact what the circulation element will look like in its final result.
Right. I can safely say, though, that from the existing general plan, all of the concepts that are being explored represent less development than is currently approved. So I feel more comfortable saying that I'm not as concerned about moving forward with that said, because we're talking about less development that's currently approved to be built within the community in the general plan sense.
Any other questions for staff? Tom? You have nothing? One of the things, Bruce, that struck me, and I mentioned it, I think, before we opened the public comment, is the difference between the sort of constraints first approach and the land use first approach. And I know I'm simplifying it a little bit. I think Ms. Roberts in particular recommended that the LCP go first, and then the general plan work through that. The maps be updated and this sort of stuff. At this point, I'm wondering when we start looking at those constraints on the proposed land uses.
Actually, we've done a pretty good job of examining them in the existing conditions report, and these concepts before they were presented included that. So we recognize that there are some vulnerabilities and some hazards in the community, and that we tried to address in the existing conditions report. Taking the 30,000-foot view, though, the idea is that these areas may be potentially permitted for subsequent development, but as you know, through the development review process in the California Environmental Quality Act, we do a site-specific survey when we get down to the proposal of each of these, as these plans are implemented on a project-by-project basis.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I'm with you. I understand that. I'm just wondering, I mean, I see, we see, for example, we see significant residential development on Beechwood on one of these concepts. And as it's pretty well public knowledge that there is a significant environmental constraint with Beechwood. And I'm wondering why we'd go through the process of potentially designating some chunk of this as residential if we know that this development will not occur within a certain portion. And I think it also picks up on what Ann Carey mentioned about some of the development shown on the Venice Beach PUD. At some point, is there a reason that we're showing this as a district that would allow for residential or commercial development without looking at some of the constraints? I mean, and at some point we're going to do that in this process. I'm just wondering when, how soon it's going to take place.
The answer is we can do that at any time you like, but for example, though, the existing general plan there are a lot of areas in the community right now that have these same general plan designations that are sensitive habitats. And when they were created, it was the same situation as now. We can choose when we go through the process if we feel like you have enough information to, and I think it's easier, like for example along riparian corridors and things like that, where it's a little bit more well defined. We can work with that, but then when we're getting into wetlands, some wetland areas are about 1 meter wide. So I mean, that kind of detail is not going to be very efficient for the general plan process.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I don't mean to suggest that every single parcel proposed for land use changes have that applied, but on some of these larger parcels that may be currently in urban reserve, where we know that there are endangered species habitat area or nearby areas along creek corridors, or there are different levels of mapping,
right?
And I know that that's something that the city juggles with. but there are areas where all of the maps agree. And I think before we go too much farther, it would be good to clearly, as Phil requested earlier, to at least start looking at how those areas that all the maps agree on, how those are being affected by the proposed land uses, and how these proposed land uses would affect those areas.
I believe that staff was going to provide us with that overlay, map overlay, so we could see how they work in conjunction with these three alternatives.
I appreciate that staff does that for us, but I think it's even more important that staff gets that out to the public. And if it's something that can happen before the council meeting on the 20th, or as part of the next GPAC group, or somewhere in that public workshop, I think people want to know. We didn't hear a dozen people mention that tonight because they don't want to know. So I think it would be helpful to get that information out.
Yep, we can do that. I'd also like to point out that some of the mapped wetland areas are shown on these maps. That, for example, we have a lot of wetlands in our coastal jurisdictional boundaries. Those are picked up, and so are the habitat areas too. So, and those are mapped areas in a larger, a higher elevation, if you will. But a lot of those areas are also picked up. But we can look at it in a finer grain of analysis, I suppose. Yes.
Rajiv, did you want to?
I'll just quickly add that we recognize that in many places there are more constraints than in others. What we've tried to do is, through the process of the three concepts, made sure that we have that range captured of the development possibilities. So for example, yes, there is a proposal in Beechwood where there is more development, but there is also another one where there is little or no development. So we want to present the choices to people. I mean, I don't think we want to take anything away. To the extent that there already is development permitted out there, we want to show that, and then we also want to show lesser development, and then we want to present that choice to people so we can come back at the preferred plan stage and then rule it out, so to say. At this stage, the idea was to capture some of the possibilities that may be possible and not just rule everything out. The second thing I would say is that we are cognizant of the fact that even if there is development on these sites, as you said earlier, not all of this land will develop. There are wetlands out there, only half of a certain land will develop. So as we are doing our calculations and so on, we are keeping that in mind, that not 100% is going to get 5 units per acre, for example. So later on, and it's very difficult to capture all of those words in a map setting like this. When it comes down to the general plan, we'll be very specific and say that while the designation is 5 units per acre, we anticipate half of the land being, as open space and developing, being clustered and so on. So we may never get to the stage of mapping the site plan at every site, but outline enough possibilities and enough direction in the general plan to make sure that all of those areas are indeed preserved at the end.
Yeah, I think that's a great point where you say you can designate an entire 20-acre parcel knowing that there are designated or protected wetlands or something in there. You can say this whole area is going to be 5 units per acre, and the development happens to be distant from that. But that is a more technical analysis that may certainly comes easy to planning professionals and those of us who geek out on this stuff. But when it comes to a map, I'm sure everybody loved every aspect of the staff report and read all the words and spent a very little amount of time looking at the maps. But for those people for whom the graphic information is critical, seeing, having some graphic acknowledgement that there are areas in which we really can't develop would be helpful for people. That's just my feedback on that. Unless anybody else wants to jump in?
I have one question.
Phil?
Thank you. I was curious, where did the substantial new visitor-oriented site at the end, at the foot of Kelly Avenue, how did that become developed as a goal? It's part of the compact core alternative. It's not just a visitor-oriented site, it's a substantial new visitor-oriented site. How did that designation get developed? And where did that come from?
You're looking for what the genesis, where
did that concept originate?
I think in the guiding principles, one of them has to do with balancing, the community as it is experienced by people in Half Moon Bay with economic development and the need to make it also attractive for visitors. And that concept of trying to balance the visitor experience, the economy, and the experience of local residents. And so trying to identify sites that are best suited to accommodate hotels, whatever other kind of visitor-oriented uses there are over a 25-year time horizon.
So it was thrown into the compact core alternative?
I wouldn't say thrown in. I would say in that sense, the idea is maybe that people who would come would be closer to downtown than they currently have an opportunity to be. They might walk on an improved Kelly Avenue to downtown businesses. That was the idea, was that connection.
There is also the larger area at the foot of Kelly that's incorporated in the Showcasing the Coast alternative as well. Just that one is more substantial than the other.
Right, so there are three ranges in there. My microphone. There are three ranges in there. There was more, there was less, and there was none. So take your pick, and they all have their pros and cons, obviously. None of these are going to be perfect to meet every objective.
No, I was just curious as to where it originated.
This is a great example of trying to bracket the choices of people. Present the consequences, and people can decide, well, yes, I realize that this one is better connection of the visitors and the folks in the downtown, but it may be too close to the neighborhoods, and we may want none of it or a compromise or whatever. So the goal is to present that with the environmental overlay, with the traffic consequences, and have it out in the feedback. And then we can keep going into more and more detail, we can keep embellishing it with the resources, with the mapping directly on it, with the notes directly and so on, so it becomes increasingly vivid and clear to people. We keep fleshing it out more. That's the idea.
Thank you. I just want to ask a couple questions about the planned development districts. And I'm wondering if staff could walk through the nature of a PD district, where where some things may not necessarily be allowed by when guidelines are proposed. And the development guidelines that are proposed that cover the entire PUD district, and how it's created initially. Are these boxed out? Did somebody look at the benefit and say this is a reasonable chunk, and in this reasonable chunk of lands that may be under one ownership, in many of these cases it's not, but is this a chunk of land? And we can see, a little bit of commercial in here. We can see X many units per acre. We could see visitor survey commercial. I mean, do they start with the site and fill in, or are they typically started with land use diagrams in general and then consolidated from there?
Excuse me. I'll be happy to try to address some of your questions. But in theory and in concept, planning and development is an elegant tool, because it really is intended to get at more environmentally sensitive development that's concentrated in theoretically more developable areas, and avoid more environmentally sensitive areas and avoid those areas. So in theory, the idea is to promote development in areas that weren't so subject to disturbance, and avoid those other areas that were. So And I'm not quite sure what one of the speakers brought up the concept of all the small lots. Well, that's true. And we have Venice Beach, for example, that has a lot of small lots. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that we have to use the Plan Unit Development District regulations as they're written in 1993 to get at those kinds of issues. You know, there are more, in our opinion, there are, depending upon which direction everybody is interested in going, there are more effective tools for trying to get the product that we'd like out of those areas. For example, some of those areas just don't meet minimum subdivision requirements, and it's entirely within the city's police power to say, even though you've got these small paper lots, they're not developable, and we deal with that routinely now. And the concept of PUDs was intended to get at some of that. And in theory, it's a great idea to cluster development and to get, you know, a comprehensive format that addressed all the needs in those areas. And some of those PUDs have, as you know, different programmatic requirements for varying residential densities and land uses and so forth, and different features, even down to affordable housing requirements. We've experienced that they're difficult to implement on a successful basis that I believe they were intended to be implemented, because they require everybody, all the ownership to participate. So if you've got, some of these have hundreds of owners, and everybody's got to agree on a specific development plan, and that has made it difficult to successfully implement the plan unit development concept in this community.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to me to be one of the most limiting things about the PUDs, and especially one in fractured ownership or fragmented ownership, where a owner or a group of owners may own 100 acres here. It seems a lot easier to get 2 or 3 people together on a concept as opposed to 200, 100, even 50. And it seems to some extent that those PUD designation over fragmented ownership, it acts as kind of a de facto development block. I mean, it prevents anything from ever happening. And you know, for some people, I think that's great. I mean, I've heard people say, we'll never get those 100 people together. It'll never be developed. And some people are okay with that. It's just a different approach. The suggestion, I'm curious to hear, unless you want to.
You know, I think one of the things we can get at is, and I believe this is entirely feasible and doable for this community. I believe that if we look at the whole equation of land, I think there are ways where everybody can come out winners when we take a fresh look at lands that are designated plan unit development, where we may say, you know, we can find agreement if there are pieces of PUD that are missing integral links of trails, where that might be a pretty good thing for all of us to connect that missing link of trail, or maybe provide stairs or parking areas or whatever, in exchange for more limited development that is really more along the lines of what was originally the, you know, environmentally sensitive conservation subdivision design, the smaller lot, dispersed lot design that was originally envisioned. I think we could probably get to that, and I think most people in the community would agree that fits within, you know, our idea of fitting well into the community in exchange for the trade-offs, or finding a balance between the positive things that development may represent in exchange for the benefits that we would achieve through access and connectivity.
I just want to follow up on what Bruce and what you also mentioned. I think you're correct. De facto, it does act as a sort of a moratorium or on development. On the other hand, when we as planners are combing through, for example, we look through the park element that dates to 25 years ago, and we're looking to see how many new parks have been added. It's nothing. And so on the one hand, we're not getting new housing or commercial development. On the other hand, we're also not getting a contiguous open space. We're not adding to the city's park inventory. We're not getting new trails. We don't have the entire coast side as an open space where somebody can jog along or whatever. So de facto, we're not getting anything in the process. It's sort of a stalled process where we're not getting development or open space or trails and connections. And I think what Bruce is alluding to is there a possibility, is there a ground where we recognize that we'll never get the 400 housing units out of a PUD that's anticipated. Maybe it is less, but maybe we'll get an open space. When we were at the Spanish-speaking meeting, many of those children wanted active recreational open space along the coastline. People wanted to see, when they talked about economic office generators, people said, can't we just have an office space also with a view maybe where we can be doing creative work as opposed to just being on Highway 1? And the people may say no, but I've been at workshops where people have said yes, and maybe it's a balance issue again. So that's a challenge for us to understand where people want to go, how far to push it or not push it, and then that's one of the objectives for us, is to lay out the choices for people, get feedback, and maybe nobody wants it, or maybe some people want it, and we look for direction from you, on that.
Well, I think there's real merit in the use of planned development districts, but reading through the descriptions and what is allowed in some of these, it doesn't seem to be a lot of these PUDs that we have right now don't seem to, the description from the early 90s certainly doesn't seem to reflect the guiding principles, or the draft guiding principles that the community outlined a year ago, or in the process that began a year ago. I think it's more attractive for some folks who would really prefer to see very minimal development, that they be left as they are, just due to the difficulty of developing those sites. But the trouble, I think, that you get into by just carrying over some of our existing 17, I mean, they're not all open, but some of our existing PUD districts, is that if you just carry them over, are you carrying over the same allowances, the same opportunities that are in the code, and those the stuff in chapter 9.3 where it gets into each one of those districts doesn't seem to reflect any of those guiding principles. And so I think it's just something for folks to keep in mind, that the only, in my view, the only reasonable way to just carry those districts forward is to thoroughly look at the descriptions and what is allowed in that code. And if you don't believe that what is in that current code in chapter 9.3 for each of these zones, if you don't think that that's what you want to see, then why carry that district forward in the first place? Why not look at it as Bruce was describing, wholesale, find the areas where within that district that may better reflect our guiding principles. My thoughts on PUDs.
Yeah, so I'd like to just piggyback on that, and I think using the PUD as a tool to create an artificial moratorium on development is disingenuous. If we want to plan to make it open space, we heard a loud and clear message tonight. I don't know what you guys have heard at other public meetings, but there was a loud and clear message that we want to protect open space. So how is it any less protective to zone something like one of these PUDs, open space conservation, than to leave it PUD? I mean, I realize PUD is a barrier, but Ocean Colony is a PUD. So it doesn't mean it can't be developed, it just means there's a high bar. But if you make it open space conservation, then it's explicitly protected and zoned the way you want it to be zoned. Then you're taking away the private ownership interest. Right. So then you get back into maybe some legal issues. Yeah. So then, well, but if you're artificially taking away their development rights by disingenuously calling it a planned unit development, it's going by default. It's a defaulted open space because it's a PUD undeveloped. Same impact to the owner of the land. But I think what Bruce is suggesting, and I think that's what Tom was discussing, was the issue of we have an opportunity to use our planning process to actually have the end uses more compatible with what we'd like to see. Right. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. That's I see that as more straightforward. So there's some trade-offs. Like in Wavecrest, for example, there could be some trade-offs. Staircase going down the beach, parking area near Wavecrest. But then you also have open space interests adjacent to that area as well. And some people over in that other PUD called Ocean Colony would not like to see development occur in Wavecrest. So you have some trade-offs that would go on. We're gonna go with our, you have any other discussion points?
Well, no, I just want to follow up with that discussion too, is that the other danger is that if you just bring forward that existing PUD designation, what happens if all those owners do finally get together? I mean, it may take someone 25 or 30 years, but let's say they're all together. It's like, okay, we're going to develop our 250 units that we have. You know, it's by accepting that, by pushing that forward, it's unlikely, but there's real tangible risk there. But that's I don't have anything else on PUDs, I promise. I wondered if we wanted to look at each of the, or if it would be helpful to staff if we went through the concepts and if you wanted to get any the three different concepts. So they're not alternatives. I know we've used that, but I think it's probably important that we consider them concepts still, because I have some specific comments and thoughts on each of the concepts that I'd be interested in talking about. I don't know, but I mean, I don't want it to be all my show. So.
No, I think we all have opinions.
Okay, we are getting close. Do we want to give ourselves a little bit more time right now so we don't lose it? Or you want to continue pushing it up to the wire?
Something, again, talk about process here. I mean, we are not making policy here. We've seen that the surveys that were done, they came up with three concepts. Is it up to us to say, no, we don't like those concepts?
We can give our feedback. I mean, staff is expecting us to give, for us to give feedback, and I think that's what Chair Conroy is asking for us to give feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
I'm talking about process here.
At the last GPAC meeting, one of the very first things that we heard from the public comment was, how do we know that these maps that you're showing us today, how do we know, we being the public, know that these are what's going to actually go forward? And I think that was coming from a a cynical place with some, fairly or unfairly cynical about the whole process. But it illustrates a good point that none of these maps that you see here tonight are going to be the map, and none of the maps that were there at the GPAC meeting a month ago are going to be the map. Right. And I'm pretty sure that nothing that the council sees on the 20th of January is going to be the map going forward. I mean, it's all part of the process, and I think this is our opportunity for us to provide specific input on the concepts that I'm assuming are going to get refined moving forward to the next council meeting. So, with that in mind, I think it's a good opportunity for us to.
All right. Well, I would like to briefly lead off by saying of the three choices of concepts, I think the compact core seems to address what I think would be, in my perspective, in the best interests of the city, but subject to many limitations, many exceptions to it. But the concept of having a core development in the downtown area and then having adjacent housing that is based upon a core makes sense in terms of the long-term growth for the city. However, I do not like, and you probably already heard this idea of stretching a visitor center, a substantial visitor center down at Kelly Beach. I don't want to see development down at the beach area. So I think we could have a compact core with housing, multi-unit housing, mixed-use housing, mixed-use commercial in the downtown core area without stretching these nodes in different district areas within Half Moon Bay. It makes more sense to have it in more compact development. So those are a couple of points I'd like to focus on. I don't like to see decentralization of commercial and these nodes. I think the neighborhood connections is going to be dependent upon the circulation element. I think it's impractical to have a lot of these so-called neighborhood connections within our community. It also entails more decentralization of the commercial. I'd like to see more of the commercial, again, development based on the downtown development. So overall, I think a good starting place from my perspective is the compact core. And that's a good starting place. So those are some of my comments. Next, Bill.
If I could just interrupt for a second, in terms of process, I think, if I understand correctly, these concepts will be brought back to your commission at another date, and that the purpose of tonight's meeting was to take the public comments and get some feedback from the public in front of the Planning Commission for staff, and I think Dante might talk to that a little bit more.
And so just to be clear, these are going to come before you to take an action on, or before the body. And so tonight we were hoping, or it might be advisable not to take a position on these issues. You can ask for us to display information, provide information for the community, but if you can just keep the record clear and not actually take a position on these alternatives tonight.
All right, I thought we were going to be providing our feedback to staff in terms of looking at these three concepts and what were good parts of it, what were not necessarily good parts of it, and not necessarily taking positions as to the specifics, but evaluating these different concepts.
Right, and that's true. I think that someone could perceive a statement as like I support or I don't support as being taken a position. So we're just trying to avoid that.
Thank you. Tom, did you want to?
No, I think that's, in that context, I think I've asked all I need to ask for clarification. I don't want to take any positions until we get more input, public input.
Barbara Boxer. Anything about Barbara Boxer?
I do think it is very helpful for us to hear from you, like lay the environmental overlay over these maps, communicate this clearly, map the resources. Those are all very good feedback items for us that when we take it forward to the public, to keep that in mind, because we often get caught in all of these details that it's hard for us at times to step back up and say, is it clear or not? This will all come back to you. So to the extent that any other bigger pointers like that you can give to us, those will be very helpful to us as we take the maps forward, yeah.
So one member of the public asked if you could publish maybe on the city website the presentation you did today, because it was a good, they felt it was a good summary, and some of these, 2-inch thick documents are a little tough to go through.
We'll do that and have all the other correspondence and everything else that was distributed. We'll post all that. I'd be happy to.
No, I'm reticent. Well, that's very good then. I would, I think in general, I would recommend that staff consider in all of these concepts, consider a broader use of the mixed use land use concept, because I think that has the potential to consolidate residential, commercial, office space, these things in the downtown core. I mean, I think that I had comments on each of these plans that more mixed use. I mean, I see there are large chunks that are commercial and there are chunks that are residential, but a more, especially in the downtown core, more mixed use, because I think that's the heart. That's our grocery stores. That's our traffic. That's our farmers markets. That's our Main Street. That's our primary access to the beach. I think that sort of development would be useful and would really go a long way towards, I think, number 3, or downtown core. Maybe I'm missing it.
So Chair Conroy, in like one of the concepts is something like that. For example, try to push the mixed use envelope a little more and broaden it and apply it more to downtown or something like
Sure.
that.
I mean, for example, on the compact core along 92, you have several clustered areas that are high-density residential. On the neighborhood connections, those same parcels are shown as commercial. It just in those downtown areas, look at more mixed use, and the specifics of which mixed uses are allowed. That's further down the road. Okay. But it's something that struck me on all of these plans.
Okay.
Any final comments? We got 6 more minutes.
I think we've exhausted.
Very good. Does the staff have looking for anything else?
I didn't have anything to add.
Okay. Well, with that, then, we will close our public hearing item. We'll close our general plan study session.
Let me say I want to thank everybody for staying until almost 10:30. I appreciate that, and I'm sure we'll have several more of these sessions in the future, and look forward to everyone being out here and giving us comments again. So thank you all for coming out.
Thank you, Les. Discussion items? I think I'm all discussed out myself.
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Good night and thank you.